Hey everyone, Miss B. Hanley here, and today we are reading The Giver, chapters 1 through 6 by Lois Lowry. And I thought I would start out by doing a little introduction of the author and learning a little bit more about her and what she's written in her career, as well as looking at some information about The Giver itself. I've got a couple of book trailers queued up, as well as the movie trailer as well. And maybe we'll talk about watching the movie in the future. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, this is from loislowry.com. This is her beautiful website. I assume that this image that we're seeing on the screen is from one of her new books. Okay, so yeah, so she just has one that just came out in February called Puzzle or something Puzzle. And then looks like one from 2020 that she wrote. But as you can see, she's written more than just The Giver. She's a pretty prolific writer. Let's go ahead and go to about her. These are her books. Let me go back. So about her, I've always felt that I was fortunate to have been born in the middle child of three. Oh, that's interesting. She's a middle child. My older sister, Helen, was very much like our mother, gentle, family-oriented, and eager to please. Little brother John was the only boy that had interest that he shared with Dad. Together, they always working on electric trains and erector sets, and later, when John was older, they seemed to have their heads under the raised hood of a car. That left me in between and exactly where I wanted most to be, on my own. I was a solitary child who lived in the world of books and my own vivid imagination. Oh, wow, that's interesting. I don't have any siblings myself, so I can't really relate to being a middle child, but it's interesting that she feels like grateful to have been there, because I feel like a lot of people don't like being the middle child. Because my father was a career military officer, an army dentist, I lived all over the world. I was born in Hawaii. Someone asked me that recently if I was born in Hawaii, and I was like, nope. But Lois Lowry was. Maybe that's where they got it. Maybe that's where they imagined it. I moved there to New York, where I began school. Then when the war began, Dad had to go overseas. When the war began. I wonder what war that was. Must have been World War II. My mother took us back to the town of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where she had grown up and where my grandparents lived. I finished elementary school there, and during the summer following 6th grade, moved to Tokyo. Wow, so she really is well-traveled. That's interesting. Where I went through 7th and 8th grades in Japan. I graduated from high school in New York City. By the time I went to college, Brown University in Rhode Island, my family was living in Washington, D.C. I married young. I had just turned 19. Wow, that is really young. It is really young. Just finished my sophomore year in college when I married a naval officer and continued the odyssey that military life requires, California. Oh, okay, so she got married. She married back into the military. California, Connecticut, daughter born there, Florida, a son. Oh, she moved to Florida. South Carolina, and finally Cambridge, Massachusetts, when my husband left the service and entered Harvard Law School. Another daughter and another son. So she's had 4 children. She's had 4 children, and then out to Maine. That's amazing. That's really interesting that they moved around. She continued to move and also had her family while she was moving. My children grew up in Maine. So did I. I returned to college at the University of Southern Maine, got my degree, went to graduate school, and finally began to write professionally. You know, it's so interesting that we hear about writers like going and getting MFAs and stuff like that. You don't have to, just like with a lot of artist degrees, you don't have to go to college in order to become a professional writer. There are lots of really successful writers who didn't go to college or who went to college maybe for a few years. But sometimes you do hear about them going to graduate school, but it's not required. It's definitely not required. The thing I had dreamed of doing since childhood when I endlessly scribbled stories and poems in notebooks. After my marriage ended in 1977, when I was 40, I met Martin, and we spent several... so she's been married twice. Okay, so her first husband was when she married at 19, when she was in college, and she married a naval officer. She doesn't say who, so maybe that didn't end well. But who knows? But she had a divorce at 40, and she had a new husband, Martin, traveling the world, but equally happily just sitting on the porch in the New York Times with the New York Times crossword puzzle. Sadly, Martin died in the spring of 2011. Oh, that's so sad. I was in my mid-70s then, so who would ever have guessed that romance would once again appear in my life? But it did. Happily now. Okay, so she's been married 3 times. Wow, okay. Now Howard Corwin, a retired doctor, and I share our lives. And so does a very shaggy Tibetan terrier named Alfie. Very happy part of my time is spent in Maine, partly in Portland, and in summer in a 1768 farmhouse surrounded by meadows and flowers and gardens. In winter, Howard and I get warm in Naples, Florida, which is not very far from where we are. But that's fun. That's interesting. Well, who doesn't love to vacation, especially in the winter time down here? That's why it's always there's so much traffic. My books have varied in content and style, yet it seems that all of them deal essentially with the same general theme, the importance of human connections. I definitely see that in The Giver. There's definitely a theme in The Giver that is very much centered around human connections. A Summer to Die, my first book, was a highly fictionalized retelling of the early death of my sister. Oh, I didn't know her sister died. And the effect of such a loss on a family. Number the Stars, set in different culture and era, tells the same story of the role that we humans play in the lives of our fellow human beings, which I think is about, if I'm not wrong, I think it is about the Holocaust. I'm pretty sure. She doesn't come right out and say it, but I feel like I remember seeing something like a Jewish star on the cover of that book, or something to do with that effect. The Giver and the 3 books that follow it make it a quartet. Gathering Blue, Messenger, and Sun take place against the background of very different cultures and times. Though they are broader in scope than my earlier books, they nonetheless speak to the same concern, the vital need of people to be aware of their interdependence, not only with each other, but with the world and its environment. Yes, yeah, I definitely say that the importance of human connections is there, but also the importance of connecting to our world as well, and the environment is a big part of the Giver series. My older son was a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. His death in the cockpit of a warplane left a little girl fatherless and tore away a piece of my world. Oh my God. But it left me too with a wish to honor him by joining the many others trying to find a way to end conflict on this very fragile earth. That is amazing. That is amazing that she would say that, because I feel like a lot of people who are in the military don't always recognize how war affects not just, us when we lose somebody who goes to war, but also the people who die who are also on the other side of it, involved with it. That's really interesting. Oh my gosh, that's so cool that she says that. I love that. That's amazing. Good for her. But so sad too. So incredibly sad. That is really sad. Both that she lost a son and that, it's really affected her that way. I'm a grandmother now for my own grandchildren, and for those of their generation, I try through writing to convey my passionate awareness that we live intertwined on this planet and that our future depends upon caring more and doing more for one another. Yeah, very true. Well, I knew I would like her. I definitely knew that I would like her. Because The Giver is such an amazing book and has so many amazing essential themes, in the book. The whole series honestly is, and if you haven't watched my review yet, please go back and watch it. I love the whole quartet. The whole series is honestly so fascinating and such a great story. It has so much in it to analyze and think about and talk about. Okay, so let's go take a look at her other books. She talked about the standalone. I think the other 2 were the standalone books, The Number the Stars. And just real quick, I want to see if I was right about the Number the Stars. Okay, so this is her new book. This looks interesting. The Windaby Puzzle. And it looks like it's 2 girls on the front cover, and one's holding a spear and a shield, and the other one's just holding a stick. So I wonder what that has to do. And there's an owl. Okay, this looks so cool. I really want to read this now. I have to see if I can find it. I have to see if I can find it on somewhere. Transports reader to an Iron Age world through the suspenseful dual narrative of there's a boy and a girl. Okay, he just has long hair, probably. Both battling to survive in an utterly one-of-a-kind blend of fiction and history. A master storyteller explores the mystery of life and the 2,000-year-old Windaby Bog body. What? Okay. Estrilled is not like other girls in her village. She wants to be a warrior. Hi, Macho Man. I'm starting early. I decided to start early so I could get done early. So welcome in. Hi. We just got started. I'm not just doing an introduction of the author right now. I haven't started reading yet, but I'll probably be getting to it soon. Probably only in the next 15 minutes. Yep, starting early. But welcome in. Thank you for coming in. This is Lois Lowry's newest book. Okay, so we're just getting into it. So Estrilled is not like other girls. She must be over here. She wants to be a warrior, Varric, and he's the orphan boy who helps her train in spite of his twisted back. Oh, also stands apart in a world where differences are poorly tolerated. Ooh, okay, interesting. Just how much danger are they in? Very interesting. Very interesting. Just gonna turn this down a little bit. And I'm gonna get back to that in a second. Okay. Inspired by the true discovery of the 2,000-year-old Windaby Bog body in North Germany. Wonder what that is. I might need to look that up. We just read this. Okay. She transports readers to an Iron Age world as she breathes life back to the Windaby child left in the bog to drown with a woolen blindfold over its eyes. Interesting. I'll have to, that must be what it was referencing, but I don't know what that is. The suspenseful exploration of lives that might have been by a gifted, intellectually curious author is utterly one of a kind. Okay, yeah, sure. I definitely agree that sounds really interesting, but now I need to know. What are they talking about? Windaby Bog body. What does that mean? Okay, here we go. There's more than one, apparently. Okay, so Windaby 1 is the name given to the bog body found preserved in a peat bog near Windaby, North Germany in 1952. Until recently, the body was also called Windaby Girl, since an archaeologist believed it to be the body of a 14-year-old girl because of its slight build. Canadian anthropologists used DNA testing to show the body was actually that of a 16-year-old boy. Okay, interesting. Interesting. The body has been radiocarbon to 41 BC or 118 AD. But okay, wait, here we go. The body appears to be an half-shaven head with a woolen blindfold tied across its eyes. Recent examinations have, however, established that the hair over the half of the scalp was not shaven, but had rather decomposed. Okay. The blindfold is, in fact, a woolen band made using the spraying technique that was probably used to tie back the boy's shoulder-length hair and which had slipped down over his face after death. Okay, interesting. Going back to this now I'm intrigued. Now I want to read this book. This looks really interesting. The Windaby puzzle. I want to read this. Let's add this. I'm adding this to my Goodreads. This is so interesting. The Windaby, and it just came out. I can't believe I haven't heard of this. I literally cannot believe I haven't heard of this. Want to read. I need to get it. That looks so good. It sounds so interesting too. That sounds so interesting. Okay. I wanted to check one thing. Oh, I knew she had written a Dear America Girl novel. Okay. Where is it? Gossamer. That one seems interesting. I feel like I have that one on my bookshelf, but I haven't read it. A Summer to Die. That was her first book. Where is it? Number of the Stars. Where is it? Hello? Number of the Stars. Here we go. See? Okay. Yeah, it's about the Holocaust. 10-year-old Anne-Marie Johansson and her best friend Ellen Rosen often think about life before the war, but now it's 1943. Their life in Copenhagen is filled with school, food shortages, and the Nazi soldiers marching down their town. Yeah, so this looks really interesting too. I wonder, it does make me wonder though, like if she's always had this perspective about war. And now I want to read that too. So yeah, I definitely, I know I have Gossamer on my shelf, and I don't actually know if I have Number of the Stars or Number of the Stars. I don't know if I have that one. So I definitely, probably should get a copy of that. And I know I have Gossamer, which is about story that tiptoes between reality and imagination. Two people, a lonely woman and an angry boy, discover what they can be to each other, renewed by strength that comes from tiny caring creature that they will never see. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. It seems really interesting. But I know I have it on my shelf, and I haven't read it yet, so I definitely should read it. I knew she's done a Dear America book. And the Windaby Puzzle. We definitely have to read the Windaby Puzzle. Okay, let's get into the Giver Quartet though. So there's 4 books in the Giver Quartet that she has written. The first is The Giver, and it's centered around Jonas, which is what we're going to be reading today. The second book is called Gathering Blue, and this is about a totally different person than in the original book, The Giver. So really, you could read The Giver and Gathering Blue almost simultaneously and still be able to understand the rest of the series. And I almost feel like, honestly, you should read them like as if they are happening simultaneously, because that's the way the rest of the series acts like, like the timeline just fits that way. So Gathering Blue is about Kira, and it's set in an entirely different community, but it's nothing like Jonas's. You almost wouldn't, if you read Gathering Blue before reading The Giver, you wouldn't even connect them at all, unless you they would feel like they would be 2 separate books, honestly. So you really could read either one of them in either order, and it wouldn't really matter. But yeah, Gathering Blue is about Kira, and then Messenger brings back Kira, and it really centers around one of the characters from Gathering Blue. But then you find out what happens with Jonas. And that's really interesting in the Messenger. And then in Sun, Giver and Gathering Blue are like simultaneously happening on the timeline of the narrative. And then Messenger is where they connect, and it keeps going. But Sun goes all the way back to the start of the whole story of The Giver, right? It goes all the way back to that. But it centers around a different character in Jonas's community. And so it kind of continues the whole story past Messenger, and then finally what happens after Messenger. And Sun, honestly, if you really are interested in the world of The Giver, Sun does a lot of really good clarification of what the world of The Giver actually is, what the community that Jonas lives in is actually like, and how things work. Because Claire has a different perspective, right? So whereas Jonas gets the assignment of receiver, Claire gets a different assignment. And so she sees the community almost from a generic villager perspective, if you could think of it that way, right? Jonas gets this perspective of all the memories and the history of the community, and Claire gets kind of the perspective of without that knowledge of there's a history and memories and stuff. She has a goal that she's trying to accomplish, and accomplish it and do that goal, but it's different. Her mindset is different. Her kind of perspective is different than Jonas's, which makes it really interesting. What I think it makes it really interesting. And that's the whole series. I highly recommend reading the whole series. Today, I'm just going to be reading The Giver, and we're going to start with a little, sorry if my noise is too loud. I hope my noise is not too loud. I'm going to pause my music here, and we're going to watch a little trailer. I'm going to show 3 book trailers from students. They're not my students. I know that they're students because they're clearly student projects. either by the description or by just, you can tell. But they're really good. They don't have anything to do, like they don't show any actors in them. Like it's not the movie trailer. So it kind of gives you an idea of the book without thinking about like certain faces of people. So here's the first one. The Giver by Lois Lowry.
I'm slowly drifting to you. Stars and planets are calling me. A billion years away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Muchman.
I'm on my way. I'm on.
No pain. Music's pretty good in this one. Dramatic. No fear. No choice. Oh. I do love how it's showing like someone sledding, like, oh, and this is just someone sledding. I mean, it's a part of the book. Like you have to read it, I guess, to know what part that is, but it is something that happens in the books. He does ride a sled. It's just kind of strange. No turning back. Okay, that was cute. That was good. It was kind of intense. I'm not gonna lie. I liked the sound at the end. That was really good. If I'm giving my full critique, the sledding part obviously is just a little random. If you haven't read the book, you kind of don't know why they're giving a sled in there. And the guy with the color stuff, like unless you read the book, you really don't know. Well, like why is this guy jumping in color? Those events do happen in the book. They're just not like. You know, you have to read the book, I guess, to understand like the context or the significance of them. Okay, so that was one book trailer. Let's take a look at another. This is another one from a student from their English 11 class. They do a voiceover for it, which I think is really cool. I'm really impressed with it. So let's take a look at that. And then we'll do one last book trailer.
In a world without color, where conformity is forced, there was a boy, Jonas.
Riding a bicycle. So yeah, in Jonas's community, they don't have cars. They just have bicycles. This is good. This is good video footage, though. It's good shots. Cameras watching you, every move. That's great. I love that. Give me a seizure while I'm watching this. It's great. Oh, and the music subtly changes here. Order for the world to work?
There must be a receiver of memory.
Okay.
He has the capacity to see beyond.
See beyond.
Close your eyes. Relax. This will not be painful.
Whoa, the image changed. That was good. That was actually really impressive. This is really impressive. The effects are not bad. Jonas has to get out. Here we go. He's gonna go on a chase. Get out, Jonas. He does kind of look a little casual for trying to escape. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, that was a good one. That trailer goes hard. The music at the end was really intense. The music at the end was very intense. Okay, so this is our last one. Oh, I forgot to do that. I was gonna let me very quickly go back. Let me very, very, very quickly go back real quick. Okay. Okay, here we go. Andrew Carter was the last one that we just watched. I'm gonna like the video. Gonna give them some likes. So if you are watching right now, go find them. I'll leave the link down in the description and go give them a like. And if you like their other videos, go subscribe. Where was the other? Yeah, let's go back real quick. Let's go back. Okay, and the other one was from Lollysad. We'll give them a like too. I don't know what kind of likes they had, but we'll give them a like too. They didn't have any comments, unfortunately. Okay, here we go. Last book trailer by Hannah Scherer. Envision a perfect world. That's what it looks like. Where there is no fear. Okay. No fear. No sickness. Great. That sounds awesome. No pain. All right, cool. Very cool. I like it. Imagine a life that is peaceful, safe, secure in a bank vault. But what if, oh no, what if this life came with a price? No freedom, no love, no choices, okay? No memories of the past, okay? What if there is only one person you can trust? This is pretty good. And he gave you the truth, okay? Your freedom returned. Your love rekindled. Your choices renewed. Okay. Your memory restored. Okay, cool. Oh. But also bad memories too, right? That's what you're saying? In your hands lies the power to make truth known and to restore to others the true pain and pleasures of life. Wow, this is pretty amazing. What would you do? This is a good one. This is a good one, Hannah. The Giver. Lois Lowry. That was a good one. That was a good one. Top mark for a book trailer by using your work. Wait a minute. I don't know. That seems like plagiarism to me. I don't know about that. Oh, but she's happy about it. Okay, good. All right, nice. AR book paid 7 points if you're reading this for an AR book. Okay, but now let's take a look. There is a movie called The Giver. It has Meryl Streep, Jeff Bridges, and I can't remember the kid's name who plays Jonas. It came out in 2014. Whoa. It came out in 2014. Really? Man, that's almost 10 years ago, you guys. 9 years ago. Oh my God. I remember when this movie came out. Okay. Man, anyway. Okay, so back to this. The Giver movie. I'm going to tell you, I feel like it's not worth it to watch the Giver movie because it's just, I mean, it does go along with the story pretty well, but the actor for Jonas is like 16 years old and he's not supposed to be. He's supposed to be 12. Like, it's very distinctive in the story that he's 12 years old. The third one is better without a doubt. It was the last one you liked, Macho Man, the most. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, you liked Hannah's. I had to read it, out loud instead of like listening to someone tell me. But yeah, sure, I liked it too. So yeah, the movie is like a little, I don't know. It's not very much like the book mainly because Jonas is like old. He's like a 16-year-old and he's supposed to be like very young. And like the whole point is that he's like very young, Okay, but let's watch and I'll talk about it and I'll criticize it intensely.
From great suffering came a solution. Communities.
Injected.
Serene, beautiful places
Injected?
where disorder became harmony.
Ooh, very scientific,
Absolutely.
futuristic.
Do you get to fly to the edge?
Oh, yeah.
What's past there?
Don't know. We're not allowed to fly past that.
Let's go.
It's against the rules, Jonas.
They're called books.
Hello? My name...
I know who you are.
Who are you?
The Giver. When the elders need guidance, I provide wisdom using memories of the past. Our world was different. There was more.
More?
Much more.
Okay. I just decided I don't want to watch this trailer anymore because I feel like it's going to give too much away. So we're going to come back to this trailer. That's right. I'm going to very much, if you want to watch it, go right ahead. You can go look for it. I'm going to not. We're not going to watch it for me. We're not going to watch it. I'm going to stop right there. That's a perfect place actually for the trailer to just end. Okay. Gives you an idea. It gives you an aesthetic of what it's supposed to look like. And I think that's really all you need. Really all you need to understand what you're getting into. The only thing is that Jonas is way too old in that trailer. He's just way too old. He's supposed to be much younger kid. And I think his friends are also supposed to be much younger. And there's a couple of differences that I already noticed in the trailer that are very different from the book. And we'll talk about it eventually when we get there. But I do want to get into reading now. I want to go ahead and get into reading now because it's 4:32 and we've got 6 chapters to read. It's not very long that we have to read, but it's a good chunk of the book. It's the first chunk of the book. Gets you into the world and it gets you into like the setup for the conflict. So, The Giver by Lois Lowry. We're going to start with chapter 1, page 1. I'm going to take us into the magical world of the book. Look at that. Look at this new background that I just added. Isn't it amazing? Woo, we're going into the book. Here we go, everybody. All right. 1. The Giver by Lois Lowry. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times, squinting toward the sky. He had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. So he's remembering, he's having a memory, right? Like he's thinking about December because it's coming up, but he's thinking back about his feelings when he was really, truly frightened was this previous time that he remembers this plane, this jet flying over the sky. And it's interesting that I don't remember reading this the first time, but he says almost a blur at its high speed. So it's going by so fast. He heard the blast of the sound, so the sound barrier breaking twice as it flew over. So it's one of those like really fast fighter jets that flew over. And that would probably be kind of scary. I'm thinking about it. Like if I wasn't at a sporting event where it was supposed to happen and I just saw a plane fly over, even if I didn't know what it was, I would be really scared. Or even if I'd never seen one do that before, be really scared. Okay. At first, he had been only fascinated. He had never seen aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field across the river, the children rode their bicycles to the riverbank and watched, intrigued, the unloading and the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. I feel like I need to do this real quick. Hang on. The aircraft. Okay, there we go. Is that? Yeah, that's better. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. It was not a squat, fat-bellied cargo plane, but a needle-nosed, single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adults as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused, for an explanation of the frightening event. Then all of the citizens had been ordered to go into the nearest building and stay there. Immediately, the rasping voice through the speakers had said, "Leave your bicycles where they are." Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his family's dwelling. He had run indoors and stayed there alone. His parents were both at work, and his little sister, Lily, was at the childcare center where she spent her after-school hours. Looking through the front door, he had seen no people. None of the busy afternoon crew of the street cleaners, landscape workers, and food delivery people who usually populated the city or the community at that time of day. He saw only the abandoned bikes here and there on their sides. An upturned wheel on one was still revolving slowly. He had been frightened then. The sense of his own community, silent, waiting, had made his stomach churn. He had trembled. But it had been nothing. Within minutes, the speakers had crackled again, and the voice, reassuring now and less urgent, had explained that the pilot in training had misread his navigational instructions and made a wrong turn. Desperately, the pilot had been trying to make his way back before his error was noticed. "Needless to say, he will be released," the voice had said, followed by silence. There was an ironic tone to that final message, as if the speaker found it amusing, and Jonas had smiled a little, though he knew what a grim statement it had been. For a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. Even the children were scolded if they used the term lightly at play, jeering at a teammate who missed a catch or stumbled in a race. Jonas had done it once and shouted at his best friend, "That's it, Asher, you're released," when Asher's clumsy error had lost a match for his team. He had been taken aside for a brief and serious talk by the coach, had hung his head with guilt and embarrassment and apologized to Asher after the game. Now, thinking about the feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river path, he remembered that moment of palpable stomach-sinking terror when the aircraft had streaked above. It was not what he was feeling now, with December approaching. He searched for the right word to describe his own feeling. Okay, so really quick, there's a couple of things in this early memory that Jonas has that explain like a couple of things about his community. First up, there's an announcement. There's a speaker system in this community that is like has a like almost this kind of strange voice that orders people around, right? It gives people information, not orders people around or gives them information about the community. Especially since they saw this aircraft and everyone's like, what's going on, right? Like they have to like let everybody know. Everybody need to go into a safe place. We don't know what this is. But then later they come back and notify everyone to kind of keep the community in the know. But we'll learn later that these announcements are kind of frequent throughout the community, that reminding the community members about certain things, and just stuff about the community and what's going on. The other thing we learn about is that Jonas has a family. He has parents and he has a sister. And additionally, there are other people in the community who are involved, right? They have different jobs around the community. So you have street cleaners, landscape workers, food delivery people, right? So like there's jobs for people that have, they do different things. And they have bicycles. Specifically, everybody has bicycles, right? Leave your bicycles where they are. I didn't want to do that. I hate when that happens. Okay. But everybody has bicycles. So it doesn't have anything. We didn't hear anything about cars or anything. So we know that there are bicycles in the community, and that's their main form of transportation. So the community must be pretty small if they're using bicycles to get around, and if they're using a announcement system to announce things to people. So that's some things that we can kind of keep under file away while we're thinking about this world, right? Also, we learn about the term releasing or being released, right? We don't really know what it is, but we know that it is a punishment or a statement of failure in certain cases. In this particular case, it is, especially when the pilot makes an error in flying across the community and it's against the rules, right? Jonas says very specifically, like, it's against the rules for the pilot to be flying over the community, and he made a mistake. And it's not something to be taken lightly either, because when Jonas mentions it or jokes about it to his friend, he's recalls another memory of him joking to his friend about, you're released because you lost the match. He's taken aside and told, no, you shouldn't say that. Like, that's not right. Like, don't say that, by his coach, right? And he had to apologize. So a couple of things about the world that we have to kind of keep in mind, right? There's this system of announcements, there's bicycles, and there's this thing called release. And there's also jobs. There's a bunch of jobs that people take on. And we also know there's something important happening in December. That's how Jonas is feeling, right? He's feeling anxious about December. He doesn't know exactly how he feels, but I mean, that's how we can kind of imagine. He knows he's not frightened, but he knows it's something else, that this kind of sick, uneasy feeling about this upcoming December. Jonas was careful about language, not like his friend Asher, who talked too fast and mixed things up, scrambling words and phrases until they were barely recognizable and often very funny. Jonas grinned, remembering the morning that Asher had dashed into the classroom late as usual, arriving breathlessly in the middle of the chanting of the morning anthem. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained standing to make his public apology as was required. I apologize for inconveniencing my learning community. Asher ran through the standard apology phrase rapidly, still catching his breath. The instructor and class waited patiently for his explanation. The students had all been grinning because they had listened to Asher's explanation so many times before. I left home at the correct time, but when I was riding along near the hatchery, the crew was separating some salmon. I guess I just got distraught watching them. I apologized to my classmates, Asher concluded. He smoothed his rumpled tunic and sat down. We accept your apology, Asher, the class recited, the standard response in unison. Many of the students were biting their lips to keep from laughing. I accept your apology, Asher, the instructor said. He was smiling. And I thank you because once again, you have provided an opportunity for a lesson in language. Distraught is too strong an adjective to describe salmon viewing. He turned and wrote distraught on the instructional board. Beside it, he wrote distracted. Jonas, nearing his home now, smiled at the recollection, thinking still as he wheeled his bike into the narrow port beside the door. He realized that frightening was the wrong word to describe his feelings. Now that December was almost here, it was too strong an adjective. He had waited a long time for this special December. Now that it was almost upon him, he wasn't frightened, but he was eager, he decided. He was eager for it to come. And he was excited, certainly. All of the 11s were excited about the event that would be coming soon. But there was a little shudder of nervousness when he thought about it, about what might happen. Apprehensive, Jonas decided. That's what I am. Hi, Connor. Welcome. We just got started with the first chapter of The Giver, and we just learned a little bit more about Jonas's community. They have to make apologies when they do something wrong, right? So I guess the pilot in training, like his mistake was so severe that he didn't go through the apology process. He went straight to release, which is like the biggest punishment you can get. But for being late to class, you just have to make an apology and explain yourself of why you were late. And then they all do like a standard response, right? When somebody makes an apology, they respond, we accept your apology. And then his teacher makes a whole point to talk about the difference between the word distraught and distracted, which is the wrong word that Asher used. And again, he's talking about going back to this special December, this event that's coming up soon for him. And he also mentions something called 11s, right? So, and he's including himself in that, right? He was excited. Certainly all of the 11s were excited about the event that would be coming soon. So it has something to do maybe with being 11, being young, like, or being that age, right? So that's something that we're going to have to like catch up on later in the book. Okay. Who wants to be first tonight for feelings? Jonas's father asked at the conclusion of their evening meal. It was one of the rituals, the evening telling of feelings. Sometimes Jonas and his sister Lily argued over turns, over who would get to go first. Their parents, of course, were part of the ritual. They too told their feelings each evening, but like all parents, all adults, they didn't fight and wheedle for their turn. Nor did Jonas tonight. His feelings were too complicated this evening. He wanted to share them, but he wasn't eager to begin the process of sifting through his own complicated emotions, even with the help he knew his parents could give. You go, Lily, he said, seeing his sister, who was much younger, only a 7, wriggling with impatience in her chair. I felt angry this afternoon, Lily announced. My childcare group was at the play area, and we had a visiting group of 7s, and they didn't obey the rules at all. One of them, a male, I don't know his name, kept going right in front of the line for the slide, even though the rest of us were all waiting. I felt so angry at him, I made my hand into a fist like this. She held up a clenched fist, and the rest of the family smiled at her small, defiant gesture. Why do you think the visitors didn't obey the rules? Mother asked. Lily considered and shook her head. I don't know. They acted like animals, Jonas suggested. He laughed. That's right, Lily said, laughing too. Like animals. Neither child knew what the word meant exactly, but it was often used to describe someone uneducated or clumsy, someone who didn't fit in. Where were the visitors from? Father asked. Lily frowned, trying to remember. Our leader told us when he made this welcome speech, but I can't remember. I guess I wasn't paying attention. It was from another community. They had to leave very early, and they had their midday meal on the bus. Mother nodded. Do you think it's possible that their rules may be different? And so they simply didn't know what your play area rules were? Lily shrugged and nodded. I suppose. You've visited other communities, haven't you? Jonas asked. My group has, often. Lily nodded. When we were 6s, we went and shared a whole school day with a group of 6s in their community. How did you feel when you were there? Lily frowned. I felt strange because their methods were different. They were learning usages that my group hadn't learned yet, so we felt stupid. Father was listening with interest. I'm thinking, Lily, he said, about the boy who didn't obey the rules today. Do you think it's possible that he felt strange and stupid being in a new place with rules that he didn't know about? Lily pondered that. Yes, she said finally. I feel a little sorry for him, Jonas said. Even though I don't even know him, I feel sorry for anyone who's in a place where he feels strange and stupid. How do you feel now, Lily? Father asked. Still angry? I guess not. I guess I feel a little sorry for him. And I'm sorry I made a fist. She grinned. Jonas smiled back at his sister. Lily's feelings were always straightforward, very simple, usually easy to resolve. He guessed that his own had been too when he was a 7. He listened politely, though not very attentively, while his father took his turn, describing a feeling of worry that he had had that day at work, a concern about one of the new children, who wasn't doing well. Jonas's father's title was nurturer. He and other nurturers were responsible for all physical and emotional needs of every new child during its earliest life. It was a very important job, Jonas knew, but it wasn't one that interested him much. What gender is it? Lily asked. Male, Father said. He's a sweet little male with a lovely disposition, but he isn't growing as fast as he should. And he doesn't sleep soundly. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the committee's beginning to talk about releasing him. Oh, no, Mother said sympathetically. I know how sad that must make you feel. Jonas and Lily both nodded sympathetically as well. Release of new children was always sad because They hadn't had a chance to enjoy life within the community yet, and they hadn't done anything wrong. There were only 2 occasions of release which were not punishment. Release of the elderly, which was a time of celebration for a life well and fully lived, and release of a new child, which always brought a sense of what could we have done. This was especially troubling for the nurturers, like Father, who felt they had failed somehow, but it happened very rarely. Well, Father said, I'm going to keep trying. I may ask the committee for permission to bring him here at night, if you don't mind. You know what the night crew nurturers are like. I think this little guy needs something extra. Of course, Mother said, and Jonas and Lily nodded. They had heard Father complain about the night crew before. It was a lesser job. The night crew nurturing assigned to those who lacked the interest or skills or insight for the more vital jobs of the daytime hours. Most of the people on the night crew had not even been given spouses because they lacked somehow the essential capacity to connect with others, which was required for the creation of a family unit. Maybe we could even keep him, Lily suggested, sweetly, trying to look innocent. The look was fake, Jonas knew. They all knew. Lily, Mother reminded her, smiling, you know the rules. 2 children, 1 male, 1 female to each family unit. It was written very clearly in the rules. Lily giggled. Well, she said, I thought maybe just this once. Okay, so we've learned a little bit more about Jonas's community in this section. We learn about we hear about 7s. So we do know that 11s and 7s with a capital letter has something to do with their age group, right? So we know that Jonas is in the group of 11s and Lily is in the group of the 7s. So he's older brother to her. And we know that they have both their parents, mother and father. This whole scene, now that I'm reading it for the second time, is very much like almost like old movie, like a black and white TV show of like a family sitting together at dinner, which was like the perfect image of a family. If you think about it, like in the 1950s and 60s, like the mom and the dad and the son and the daughter sitting at dinner, talking about their feelings, talking about their day, right, is very like almost too perfect, kind of gives off that like very like perfect idea of a perfect American family or something like that, right? Okay, so first up, we also learn about rituals, right? The evening telling of feelings. Like that's a pretty big, it's a common practice in every family household where each member of the family shares their feelings of the day. And the children are obviously always like deciding who goes first. And Jonas is not feeling up to it, so he lets Lily go first. And we hear that like the parents do it too. Like everybody is involved in the sharing of feelings kind of thing, which is not a bad thing to do, right? Like you kind of opening up to your family members, making a connection with them and, sharing your thoughts with them. When we get a little longer into the book, there's like a morning ritual. Like, so they have a breakfast around the breakfast table ritual, and then they have around the dinner table ritual. And this is the dinner table ritual. So when we get to it, the next morning is going to be the morning breakfast table ritual, which is another thing altogether. Okay, so Lily gets into her thing and she talks about a visiting group of 7s. So we know that Jonas's community is one of many, right? There's many communities, and that there are people from these other communities, specifically like kids, who take field trips to different communities. I'm not sure why they do this. They don't really explain it, but probably to get them to be more, I don't know, interested about their world, I guess, or like empathetic of other cultures, other communities. I don't know if it's quite another culture or not, but let's see. But anyway, Lily talks about how she got mad at this boy, and she said that all these kids in the visiting group of 7s acted like animals. Jonas volunteers the word animals. But then it says very specifically here that neither child knew what the word meant exactly, but it was often used to describe someone who was uneducated or clumsy or someone who didn't fit in. This is like really interesting because it's another clue to Jonas's world that nobody knows what animals are, or animals don't exist in this world, basically, right? Like Jonas doesn't know what they are. Lily doesn't know what they are. They're just using that word to describe someone who's uneducated and clumsy, but they don't know what animals are, right? Like animals don't exist for them. It's not a thing. So birds, no. Cats, dogs, there's no pets, there's no horses, there's no cows, there's no pigs, right? So like there's no farms because there's no farm animals, right? So it's like really interesting clue to like the world that there's no animals there. Where did all the animals go, you know? Okay, anyway, then we keep going. They propose that I think mother proposes that perhaps this community has different rules, which brings up another question about the whole community's idea. You know, do they have different rules? You know, what are their rules? Or is it just like micro rules where it's like little rules are different, but like bigger rules are the same? Because there are big rules like pilots not flying over the community. I feel like that kind of rule would be standard across all communities if they're all really the same. I don't know. It just brings up a lot of questions about that. Another indicator of like different groups, right? Being sixes. And then talking about this whole like perfect image thing. It's very much as like a back to school episode of like how to share your feelings with your family, right? Like he's like, you know, they go through this whole process of explaining to Lily, like maybe this boy from another community just didn't know. And maybe he felt stupid in this community because he didn't know what was going on. Haven't you ever felt stupid, you know, in that situation? How do you feel? And Jonas is like, well, I feel sorry for him. And then Lily's like, yeah, I guess I don't feel angry. I'm sorry I made a fist, right? It's so like, I don't know, like rereading it is like, it's almost creepy, like the way that they're interacting, even though they're like talking about positive things, like even though it's like they're getting to a very positive outcome of the interaction. It shows how good this community is, that they have these families that are able to share their feelings with each other and open up and kind of, you know, grow from these feelings. The fact that Lily starts out as her feeling of the day is like angry, right? But it goes to, oh, now she feels kind of sympathetic, right? Because, you know, she was able to feel bad for the other kid. And Jonas even comments on how simple and straightforward and easy to resolve this problem is. And I think it always is that way when you're older and you're looking at younger people problems. You're like, wow, that's such an easy thing to deal with because you've done that already. You've kind of been through that experience already. So you feel like that problem that's resolved for them is easy already because you've already done it. But to Jonas, his problem seems very difficult and complicated, right? He has very complicated emotions, even though an adult might look at it and be like, oh, that's actually pretty simple. Anyway, going back to the whole perfect thing, kind of creepy, even though it's positive, it's still kind of creepy to see their family like be so almost like it's scripted, almost like it's like a TV show that was scripted. And this is like the resolution. It's just kind of weird. We also learned about new children and how Jonas's father is a nurturer. So his job is is basically in charge of taking care of the babies, the new children, the ones who have just been born, which raises questions about like, where do the babies come from, right? Because if they're not like, he's not a hospital care worker. He's not like working at the hospital. And they don't mention anything about babies going home with moms. So it is kind of interesting that they bring this up and it's like very different than what we would expect. And then they talk about release, right? There's multiple ways that somebody can be released. First up, you have the punishment, but then you also have being an old person, right? A time of celebration, of life fully lived. But then you also have a release of a new child, which is like sad because they didn't make it, basically. Like they weren't developed enough or they didn't grow fast enough. And so that's like kind of a sad instance. So it's kind of giving us more clues as to what release actually is. But those are the many different reasons and how people or why people would be released from the community. And then we also get another clue about another rule in the community, which is that 2 children per family. So you have a mom and dad, and then you have a daughter and you have a son, but you can't have any more children than that. And it has to be daughter and son. It can't be daughter or son. And because Lily asks, oh, maybe we could take this baby home and keep him, right? And no, that's against the rules, right? So it's interesting because we're getting more and more information slowly about this world and the rules that are involved in it, thanks to this kind of exposition that we're getting from Jonas and his family and his memories of the community itself. Okay, let's keep going. Next, Mother, who held a prominent position at the Department of Justice, talked about her feelings. Today, a repeat offender had been brought before her. Someone had broken the rules before. Someone who she had hoped had been adequately and fairly punished, and who had been restored to his place, to his job, his home, his family unit. To see him brought before her a second time caused her overwhelming feelings of frustration and anger, and even guilt that she hadn't made a difference in his life. I feel frightened for him too, she confessed. You know, there's no third chance. The rules say that if there is a third transgression, he simply has to be released. Jonas shivered. He knew it had happened. There was even a boy in his group of 11s whose father had been released years before. No one ever mentioned it. The disgrace was unspeakable. It was hard to imagine. Lily stood up and went to her mother. She stroked her mother's arm. From his place at the table, Father reached over and took her hand. Jonas reached for the other. One by one, they comforted her. Soon she smiled, thanked them, and murmured that she felt soothed. I'm going to really quick. Sorry. The ritual continued. Jonas, Father asked, "You're last tonight." Jonas sighed. This evening, he almost would have preferred to keep his feelings hidden, but it was, of course, against the rules. I'm feeling apprehensive, he confessed, glad that the appropriate descriptive word had finally come to him. Why is that, son? His father looked concerned. I know there's really nothing to worry about, Jonas explained, and that every adult has been through it. I know you have, Father, and you too, Mother, but it's the ceremony that I'm apprehensive about. It's almost December. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. The ceremony of 12, she whispered in an awed voice. Even the smallest children, Lily's age and younger, knew that it lay in the future for each of them. I'm glad you told us your feelings, Father said. Lily, Mother said, beckoning to the little girl. Go on now and get into your night clothes. Father and I are going to stay here and talk to Jonas for a while. Lily sighed, but obediently she got down from her chair. Privately, she asked. Mother nodded. Yes, she said. This will be a private one with Jonas. Okay, so going back before we finish up chapter 1, in this last section, we do know in this community there is such a thing as a Department of Justice that deals out punishments to people who break the rules. And Jonas's mother obviously talks about a situation in which someone had come before her, had broken the rules once before, and is now in front of her again, right, as she's dealing out punishments. And it's making her kind of concerned because after 3 instances of rule breaking, there's no third chance. You're sent to release, which is pretty sad. Obviously, they've talked about release several times in this chapter, so we all know that it's something that is bad for people who are not old. So again, something that's bad for people that are not old, or something that is seen as bad for people who are not old, because that's the only time in which people are happy for someone to be released is when someone's old, which is a very clear indicator, I feel like, of what it could possibly be. I'm not going to say what I think it is because I don't want to, give anybody any thoughts. But if you think you know what it is, comment down below. Okay, so then we also finally understand why Jonas is apprehensive, right? Or anxious or nervous about December. It's this thing called the ceremony of 12. And so even Lily knows about the ceremony 12. It's something that everybody has to go through as a ceremony of 12. And if we're going along with our clues from this chapter, 6s, 7s, 11s, 12s, it has to do with age. So it has to do with Jonas turning 12, I assume, and something that's going to happen when he turns 12, some kind of ceremony that he takes place in. So let's go ahead and, sorry, I don't know why this isn't working. There we go. Nope. Nope, doesn't want to work. Come on. Okay. I'm going to move into chapter 2. Just listen. Thank you. There we go. Sorry, I'm just trying to fix my screen so I can make sure I can see everything. Okay. All right, great. Chapter 2. Jonas watched as his father poured a fresh cup of coffee. He waited. You know, his father finally said, every December was exciting to me when I was young. And it has been for you and Lily too, I'm sure. Each December brings such changes. Jonas nodded. He could remember the Decembers back to when he had become, well, probably a 4. The earlier ones were lost to him. But he observed them each year, and he remembered Lily's earliest Decembers. He remembered when his family received Lily, the day she was named, the day she had become a 1. The ceremony for ones was always noisy and fun. Each December, all new children born in the previous year turned 1. One at a time, there were always 50 in each year's group. I feel like I've missed that before in other readings. There's always 50 in each year's group, if none had been released. They had been brought to the stage by the nurturers who had cared for them since birth. Some were already walking, wobbly on their unsteady legs. Others were no more than a few days old, wrapped in blankets and held by their nurturers. I enjoy the naming, Jonas said. His mother agreed, smiling. The year we got Lily, we knew, of course, that we would receive our female because we'd made our application and been approved. But I'd been wondering what her name would be. I could have sneaked a look at the list prior to the ceremony, Father confided. The committee always makes the list in advance, and it's right there in the office at the nurturing center. As a matter of fact, he went on, I feel a little guilty about this, but I did go in this afternoon and look to see if this year's naming list had been made yet. It was right there in the office, and I looked up number 36. That's the little guy I've been concerned about, because it occurred to me that it might enhance his nurturing if I could call him by a name, just privately, of course, when no one is around. Did you find it? Jonas asked. He was fascinated. It didn't seem a terribly important rule, but the fact that his father had broken a rule still at all awed him. He glanced at his mother, the one responsible for adherence to rules, and was relieved to see that she was smiling. His father nodded. His name, if he makes it to the naming without being released, of course, is to be Gabriel. So I whisper that to him when I feed him every few hours, and during exercise and playtimes, if no one can hear me. I call him Gabe, actually, he said, and grinned. Gabe, Jonas tried it out. A good name, he decided. Though Jonas had only become a 5 the year that they acquired Lily and learned her name, he remembered the excitement, the conversations at home, wondering about her, how she would look, who she would be, how she would fit in with their established family unit. He remembered climbing the steps to the stage with his parents, his father by his side that year instead of with the nurturers, since it was the year he would be given a new child of his own. He remembered his mother taking the new child, his sister, into her arms, while the document was read to the assembled family units. Child 23, the namer had read, Lily. He remembered his father's look of delight and that his father had whispered, She's one of my favorites. I was hoping for her to be the one. The crowd had clapped and Jonas had grinned. He liked his sister name. Lily, barely awake, had waved her small fist. Then they had stepped down to make room for the next family unit. When I was an 11, his father said now, as you are, Jonas, I was very impatient waiting for the ceremony of 12. It was a long 2 days. I remember that I enjoyed the ones, as I always do, but that I didn't pay much attention to the other ceremonies, especially for my sisters. She became a 9 that year and got her bicycle. I'd been teaching her to ride mine, even though technically I wasn't supposed to. Jonas laughed. It was one of the few rules that was not taken very seriously, and it was almost always broken. The children all received their bicycles at 9. They were not allowed to ride bicycles before then, but almost always the older brothers and sisters had secretly taught the younger ones. Jonas had been thinking already about teaching Lily. There was talk about changing the rule and giving the bicycles at an earlier age. A committee was studying the idea. When something went to a committee for study, people always joked about it. They said that the committee members would become elders by the time the rule changes were made. Rules were very hard to change. Sometimes, if it was a very important rule, unlike the one governing the age for bicycles, it would have to go eventually to the receiver for a decision. The receiver was the most important elder. Jonas had never seen him, that he knew of. Someone in a position of such importance lived and worked alone. But the committee would never bother the receiver with a question about bicycles. They would simply fret and argue about it themselves for years, until the citizens forgot that it had ever gone to them for study. His father continued, "So I watched and cheered when my sister, Katya, became a 9 and removed her hair ribbons and got her bicycle." Father went on, "Then I didn't pay much attention to the 10s and 11s, and finally, at the end of the second day, which seemed to go on forever, it was my turn. It was the ceremony of 12. Jonas shivered. He pictured his father, who must have been a shy and quiet boy, for he was a shy and quiet man, seated with his group, waiting to be called to the stage. The ceremony of 12 was the last of the ceremonies, the most important. I remember how proud my parents looked, and my sister too, even though she wanted to be out riding a bicycle publicly. She stopped fidgeting and was very still and attentive when my turn came. But to be honest, Jonas, his father said, for me, there was not the element of surprise that there is with your ceremony, because I was already fairly certain what my assignment was to be." Jonas was surprised. There was no way, really, to know in advance. It was a secret selection made by the leaders of the community, the committee of elders, who took their responsibility so seriously that there were never even any jokes made about assignments. His mother seemed surprised too. "How could you have known?" she asked. His father smiled his gentle smile. "Well, it was clear to me, and my parents later confessed that it had been obvious to them too, what my aptitude was. I had always loved the new children more than anything. When my friends in my age group were holding bicycle races or building toy vehicles or bridges with their construction sets, or all the things I do with my friends," Jonas pointed out, and his mother nodded in agreement. "I always participated, of course, because as children we must experience all of those things. And I studied hard in school, as you do, Jonas. But again and again during my free time, I found myself drawn to the new children. I spent almost all of my volunteer hours helping at the nursery center. Of course, the elders knew that from their observation." Jonas nodded. During the past year, he had been aware of the increasing level of observation. In school, at recreation time, and during volunteer hours, he had noticed the elders watching him and the other 11s. He had seen them taking notes. He knew, too, that the elders were meeting for long hours with all of their instructors that he and the other 11s had during their years of school. "So I expected it, and I was pleased, but not at all surprised. When my assignment was announced as nurturer," Father explained. "Did everyone applaud, even though they weren't surprised?" Jonas asked. "Oh, of course. They were happy for me, and that my assignment was what I wanted most. I felt very fortunate." His father smiled. "Were any of the 11s disappointed your year?" Jonas asked. Unlike his father, he had no idea what his assignment would be, but he knew that some would disappoint him. Though he respected his father's work, nurturer would not be his wish, and he didn't envy laborers at all. His father thought, "No, I don't think so. Of course, the elders are so careful in their observations and selections. I think it's probably the most important job in our community," his mother commented. "My friend Yoshiko was surprised by her selection as doctor," Father said, "but she was thrilled. And let's see. There was Andre. I remember when we were boys, he never wanted to do physical things. He spent all the recreation time he could with his construction set. And his volunteer hours were always on building sites. The elders knew that, of course, and Andre was given assignment of engineer, and he was delighted. Andre later designed the bridge that crosses the river to the west of town," Jonas's mother said. "It wasn't there when we were children." There were very rarely disappointments to Jonas. "I don't think you need to worry about that," his father reassured him. "And if there are, you know there's an appeal process." But they all laughed at that. An appeal went for a committee for study. "I worry a little about Asher's assignment," Jonas confessed. "Asher's such fun, but he doesn't really have any serious interests. He makes a game out of everything." His father chuckled. "You know," he said, "I remember when Asher was a new child at the nurturing center, before he was named. He never cried. He giggled and laughed at everything. All of us on the staff enjoyed nurturing Asher." "The elders know Asher," his mother said. "They'll find exactly the right assignment for him. I don't think you need to worry about him, but Jonas, let me warn you about something that may not have occurred to you. I know I didn't think about it until after my ceremony of 12. "What is that?" "Well, it's the last of the ceremonies, as you know. After 12, age isn't important. Most of us even lose track of how old we are as time passes, though the information is in the Hall of Open Records. And we could go and look it up if we wanted to. What's important is the preparation for adult life and the training you'll receive in your assignment. I know that, Jonas said. Everyone knows that. But it means, his mother went on, that you'll move into a new group, and each of your friends will. You'll no longer be spending your time with your group of 11s. After the ceremony of 12, you'll be with your assignment group, with those in training. No more volunteer hours, no more recreation hours, so your friends will no longer be as close. Jonas shook his head. Asher and I will always be friends, he said, firmly, and there will still be school. That's true, his father agreed. But what your mother just said is true as well. There will be changes. Good changes, though, his mother pointed out. After my ceremony of 12, I missed my childhood recreation, but when I entered my training for law and justice, I found myself with people who shared my interest. And I made friends on a new level, friends of all ages. Did you still play at all after 12? Jonas asked. Occasionally, his mother replied, but it didn't seem as important to me. I did, his father said, laughing. I still do. Every day at the nurturing center, I played bounce on the knee and peekaboo and hug the teddy. He reached over and stroked Jonas's neatly trimmed hair. Fun doesn't end when you become 12. Lily appeared wearing her nightclothes in the doorway. She gave an impatient sigh. This is certainly a very long, private conversation, she said, and there are certain people waiting for their comfort object. Lily, her mother said fondly, you're very close to being an 8. And when you're an 8, your comfort object will be taken away. It'll be recycled for the new, younger children. You should be starting to go off to sleep without it. But her father had already gone to the shelf and taken down the stuffed elephant which was kept there. Many of the comfort objects, like Lily's, were soft, imaginary creatures. Jonas's had been called a bear. Here you are, Lily Billy, he said. I'll come help you remove your hair ribbons. Jonas and his mother rolled their eyes, yet they watched affectionately as Lily and her father headed to her sleeping room with the stuffed elephant that had been given to her as her comfort object when she was born. His mother moved to her big desk and opened her briefcase. Her work never seemed to end, even when she was at home in the evening. Jonas went to his own desk and began to sort through his school papers for the evening's assignment, but his mind was still on December and the coming ceremony. Though he had been reassured by the talk with his parents, he hadn't the slightest idea what assignment the elders would be selecting for his future, or how he might feel when the day finally came. Okay, so chapter 2 gives us, again, more insight specifically to what Jonas is anxious about or apprehensive about, which is the ceremony of 12. And we learn a little bit about what that is. So the ceremony of 12, backing up, there's a ceremony every December. We learned that, right? There's a ceremony every December, and that each age group basically levels up a year. So it says all new children born in the previous year turned 1. So everybody has basically the same birthday, even though it doesn't matter what day you were born throughout the year. Everybody's like celebrating their first year of living on the same day. And it does clearly state in the book that there are always 50 in each year's group. So there are only 50 spots in each year's group. So if twins are born, it means that one of them has to be released because there's only a certain amount of spots. And so basically they are prepared for 50 births. But out of those 50, some of them might be undeveloped, basically, and not make it to the naming ceremony and be released before then. But 50 is like the cap. So twins are not allowed. And you also have to think, especially if they're like identical twins, it would be really awkward, like walking around the community and running into someone who looks just like you. Like everyone would know that those two people came from the same person, right? That they were twins. And if, children aren't like born into a family, as we learn, then they would be separated. And it would just be, I don't know, I feel like it would be awkward, thinking about it. But we do learn that children are given to families, and that's how they ensure that each family has one boy and one girl, a son and a daughter in their family. Again, interesting because it's not how we do things in our world, right? But the children are born and they are given to a family at the ceremony, and they're given a name as well. So before the naming ceremony, they're just called a number. And then on the day in December during the ceremony, they give their name and they're given to a family that has passed their application process, because we also learn that there is an application process to get a child in this community, right? Let's see, where did it say that? I think it's okay. Yeah. The year we got Lily, we knew, of course, that we'd receive our female because we'd made our application and been approved. But nobody tells you before the ceremony. So it's like trying to keep the element of surprise or the element of excitement coming. Like, I guess that's a way to like keep people interested in the ceremony. It's like to know not know what's going to happen ahead of time. So it's kind of like, keeps people engaged. And we also learned that there are certain rules that seem to be more serious than others, especially because Jonas's father mentions about breaking a rule, and his mom, who is in charge of the department of who's in charge of adhering to the rules, right? Who sees people who break the rules and decides whether they should be punished. She's fine with it, right? She's not necessarily concerned about her husband breaking a rule at his job because it doesn't seem to be a bad one. It doesn't seem to be one that's necessarily bad for the community. And there's another rule that's also gets broken a lot, and that's that's the rule for bicycles. So ones we learn get a name and they get a family. We don't know what happens for 2s or 3s or 4s or 5s or 6s or 7s or 8s. Well, we do know what happens for 8s because it does mention later at the end of the chapter that 8s get their comfort object taken away. And we'll come back to the comfort object in just a second. But 9s get a bicycle. And I think it also does mention that the girls' hair ribbons get removed. I think. Yeah, I think because Jonas's dad is mentioning his sister, 9s removed their hair ribbons. So they get a bike and the girls get their hair ribbons removed. They can let their hair down instead of holding their hair back in a ribbon, I guess. But the bicycle rule gets broken because older siblings will teach the younger siblings how to ride a bike before they turn 9 so that they're ready to ride their bike when they turn 9. And it doesn't seem to be a rule that anybody cares about anyone breaking. I imagine that if they had problems with younger kids riding bikes and falling and getting hurt, then they would make it more enforced, but it's probably why they don't enforce it, right? Is because it's not hurting anybody. Okay, so, and we learn about the new child that Jonas's dad is worried about, but let's get back to the ceremonies, right? So 9s get their bike, 10s we don't know, 11s we don't know, and we know that 12s is the most important ceremony. It's the last ceremony. After this, there's no more ceremonies for turning your age. Even the mom says we lose track of our age, right? When we get older after 12, which sounds kind of crazy. You probably remember your age up until a certain age, but then once you become a full-fledged adult, it doesn't seem important to keep track of your age, even though you could go back and look. And I don't know, that does make me wonder though, how do they decide when people are ready to move on to the next phase? Because they do talk about it a little bit about how there are phases in life, right? So there's a phase when you're a parent, after you get your assignment and you get a job, then you start your family unit, right? You get a spouse, you get assigned a spouse, you get assigned children, but then when the children grow up, they go away into their own family units, and then the couple becomes a childless adult, right? And so they go live with the other childless adults. And then at some point they become an old person and they go into the house of the old. And I think they talk about it later, but we'll come back to that. So there's stages in this community that they mark through the ceremonies. But after 12, age isn't really important. It just kind of depends on how you apply for certain things within the community and how the community thinks you're fit to do those things, right? Because it's the committee of elders that ultimately decides how things get assigned and who gets what and how things get sorted out, which is kind of interesting. It takes away the choice from other people, but it seems to make them happier, right? Because Jonas and his family are really happy in the family that they have. And no one is in a family who doesn't want to be, right? If, you get married to someone and you realize later you don't want to be in a relationship with them, there is none of that, right? Because they find people who are compatible, they find families who are compatible, and they stick them together. Let's go into, we do learn about Gabriel. talk about him for a second. This little baby that Jonas's father is nurturing at the nurturing care center, and he's worried about him. And he thinks that by looking at his name ahead of time before the naming ceremony might help him develop, like calling him his name, right? And, privately, just to help him, like, I guess develop more. I don't know if Jonas's dad has any reason to think that works. Maybe he's done it before. I mean, he didn't with Lily, with his daughter, the one that they were assigned, but I don't know where he would get that idea from, but that's interesting. And then we also learn about the rules, how they're hard to change. Basically, it goes to the committee and they study it. And other things that go to committees for study are if you don't like your job and you want to change it, and it goes to the committee for study. And the community jokes about it because it's not something that seems like it's going to happen, right? They say that they would become elders by the time the rule change was made. So it would take too long for them to change it. And basically they just say, oh yeah, we're going to change it, and then forget about it. And they said, though, that some serious rules would go to the receiver. And Jonas is the first time Jonas mentions the receiver and his important role in the community. And he seems to be like a loner, right? He doesn't have a family. He doesn't know nobody knows who he is, doesn't recognize him at least. And so, but he knows that it's a really important job on the committee because he's in charge of the rules. He's in charge of advising the committee. Okay, so then they talk a little bit about the ceremony of 12. We see talk about, his father and his kind of like he wasn't surprised about his assignment, but Jonas is not sure what his assignment's going to be, right? Like, Jonas's father is saying, like, it was obvious to me what my assignment was going to be because I loved doing that. And all the elders kept watching me do all these things, like going to the nurturing center. So I knew that was what I was going to do. And nobody seems really unhappy with their assignment, right? Everybody's like happy with what they get because it seems to fit them. The community watches people very carefully to make sure that they're giving them an assignment that actually works for them as a person so that they're happy. And Jonas even says, like, well, Asher, what's he possibly going to do? And his mom says that the committee will make the right choice for him, right? The elders know him. They've watched him. They've made the observations. They're going to make a decision that's right for Asher, just like they're going to make a decision that's right for Jonas. That's what she's kind of implying with that. She doesn't want Jonas to worry, even though he is, because he doesn't really seem to have a specific interest, right? He says he knows he's not interested in being a nurturer, and he knows he's not interested in being a laborer, which sounds, I would agree with that. I wouldn't want to be a laborer either, because it sounds like it would be pretty difficult to do. And then they do bring up this thing about like how after the ceremony, after you get your assignment, you're going to move. There's going to be change. You're going to move into a new time of your life. Basically, you're going to meet new people. You're going to have new circles that you socialize in, which is very true. It's always very true, I think, in our development as well. Like our social circles change as we get older, and we change, schools, we change jobs and that kind of thing. And so that's what his mom's trying to prepare him for, is like, hey, you and Asher are friends now, but, just be prepared for him to get new friends and you to get new friends. And Jonas kind of makes a statement. It's like, oh, no, we're always going to be friends. Of course, you always say that when you're younger. Very rarely does it ever seem to work out that you're friends forever. Just saying. So enjoy the time you have. Enjoy the time you have with your friends now. That's the real message here. Okay. And then they talk about the comfort object, which is the last thing I want to talk about with this chapter. Specifically, a comfort object is basically a stuffed animal. And Jonas says it's a stuffed imaginary creature. Lily's comfort object is a stuffed elephant. Elephants are not imaginary creatures, at least in our world. So again, this reference to possibly being an animal, being no animals in Jonas's world. So much so that Jonas and Lily don't even have like a memory of animals ever existing, right? They think they're just imaginary, which is very interesting. Animals are not in the community. They're not in the world. What happened to them? Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 3. Okay. Are we going to make it to chapter 6? What time are we at? Oh yeah, definitely. We might be finished at 7, which is when I had originally planned to start. So, well, that's okay. That's all right. It worked out. It'll be recorded to be watched. So if you didn't make it earlier today. We didn't start at 7. Sorry about that, but I hope you enjoyed the recording for you. Leave me a comment if you are watching this. Okay, chapter 3. Oh, look, Lily squealed in delight. Isn't he cute? How tiny he is and how he has funny eyes like yours, Jonas. Jonas glared at her. He didn't like it when she had mentioned his eyes. He waited for his father to chastise Lily, but father was busy unstrapping the carrying basket from the back of his bicycle. Jonas walked over to look. It was the first thing Jonas noticed as he looked at the new child peering up curiously from the basket. The pale eyes. Almost every citizen in the community had dark eyes. His parents did, and Lily did, and so did all of his group members and friends. But there were few exceptions. Jonas himself and a female 5 who he had noticed had the different lighter eyes. No one mentioned such things. It wasn't a rule, but was considered rude to call attention to things that were unsettling or different about individuals. Lily, he decided, would have to learn that soon, or she would be called in for chastisement because of her insensitive chatter. Father put his bike into its port. Then he picked up the basket and carried it into the house. Lily followed behind, but she glanced back over her shoulder at Jonas and teased, "Maybe he had the same birth mother as you." Jonas shrugged. He followed them inside, but he had been startled by the new child's eyes. Mirrors were rare in the community. They weren't forbidden, but there was no real reason for them. And Jonas had simply never bothered to look at himself very often, even when he found himself in a location where a mirror existed. Now, seeing the new child and its expression, he was reminded that the light eyes were not only a rarity, but gave the one who had them a certain look. What was it? Depth, he decided, as if one were looking into a clear water of the river down to the bottom, where things might lurk which hadn't been discovered yet. He felt self-conscious, realizing that he too had that look. He went to his desk, pretending not to be interested in the new child. On the other side of the room, Mother and Lily were bending over to watch as Father unwrapped the blanket. "What's his comfort object called?" Lily asked, picking up the stuffed creature which had been placed beside the new child in his basket. Father glanced at it. "Hippo," he said. Lily giggled at the strange word. "Hippo," she repeated, and put the comfort object down again. She peered at the unwrapped new child, who waved his arms. "I think new children are so cute," Lily sighed. "I hope I get assigned to be a birth mother." "Lily!" Mother spoke very sharply. "Don't say that. There's very little honor in that assignment." "But I was talking to Natasha. And you know the 10 who lives around the corner? She does some of her volunteer hours at the birthing center, and she told me that birth mothers get wonderful food, and they have very gentle exercise periods, and most of the time they just play games and amuse themselves while they're waiting. I think I'd like that," Lily said petulantly. 3 years, Mother told her firmly. 3 births, and that's all. After that, they're laborers for the rest of their adult lives until the day that they enter the house of the old. Is that what you want, Lily? 3 lazy years and then hard physical labor until you're old? "Well, no, I guess not," Lily acknowledged reluctantly. Father turned the new child onto his tummy in the basket, sat beside it, and rubbed his small back with a rhythmic motion. "Anyway, Lily Billy," he said affectionately, "the birth mothers never even get to see the new children. If you enjoy the little ones so much, you should hope for an assignment as nurturer. When you're an 8 and you start your volunteer hours, you can try some at the nurturing center." We learned that 8s start volunteer hours, so they have to give up their comfort object, and then they get to start kind of like pretending to work, getting to try out different things. "Yes, I think I will," Lily said. She knelt beside the basket. "What did you say his name is? Gabriel?" "Hello, Gabriel," she said in a sing-song voice. Then she giggled. "Oops," she whispered. "I think he's asleep. I guess I better be quiet." Jonas turned to the school assignments on his desk. Some chance of that, he thought. Lily was never quiet. Probably she should hope for an assignment as speaker so that she could sit in the office with the microphone all day, making announcements. He laughed silently to himself, picturing his sister droning on self-important voice that all speakers seemed to develop, saying things like, Attention, this is a reminder to females under 9 that hair ribbons are to be neatly tied at all times. He turned toward Lily and noticed, to his satisfaction, that her ribbons were as usual, were undone and dangling. There would be an announcement like that quite soon, he felt certain, and it would be directed mainly at Lily, though her name, of course, would not be mentioned. Everyone would know. Everyone had known, he remembered, with humiliation, that the announcement, "Attention, this is a reminder to male 11s that objects are not to be removed from the recreation area and that snacks are to be eaten, not hoarded," had been specifically directed at him, the day last month that he had taken an apple home. No one had mentioned it, not even his parents, because the public announcement had been sufficient to produce the appropriate remorse. He had, of course, disposed of the apple and made his apology to the recreation director the next morning before school. Jonas had thought again about the incident. He was still bewildered by it, not by the announcement or the necessary apology. Those were standard procedures. He had deserved them, but by the incident itself. He probably should have brought up his feelings of bewilderment that very evening when the family had shared their feelings of the day. But he had not been able to sort out and put words to the source of his confusion, so he had let it pass. It had happened during the recreation period, when he had been playing with Asher. Jonas had casually picked up an apple from the basket where the snacks were kept, and had thrown it to his friend. Asher had thrown it back, and they had begun a simple game of catch. There had been nothing special about it. It was an activity that he had performed countless times. Throw, catch, throw, catch. It was effortless for Jonas, and even boring, though Asher enjoyed it. And playing catch was a required activity for Asher because it would improve his hand-eye coordination, which was not up to standards. But suddenly, Jonas had noticed, following the path of the apple through the air with his eyes, that the piece of fruit had, well, this was the part he couldn't adequately understand. The apple had changed just for an instant. It had changed in mid-air, he remembered. Then it was in his hand, and he looked at it carefully. But it was the same apple, unchanged. The same size and shape, a perfect sphere. The same nondescript shade, about the same shade of his own tunic. There was absolutely nothing remarkable about that apple. He had tossed it back and forth between his hands a few times, then thrown it again to Asher, and again in the air. For only an instant, it had changed. It had happened 4 times. Jonas had blinked, looked around, and then tested his eyesight, squinting at the small print on the identification badge attached to his tunic. He had read his name clearly. Hang on. I'm going to highlight that. We'll come back to that. He could also clearly see Asher at the other end of the throwing area. He had no problem catching the apple. Jonas had been completely mystified. "Ash," he called, "does anything seem strange to you about this apple?" "Yes," Asher called back, laughing. "It jumps out of my hand onto the ground," after Asher had just dropped it once again. So Jonas laughed too, and with his laughter tried to ignore his uneasy conviction that something had happened. But he had taken the apple home, against the recreation area rules. That evening, before his parents and Lily arrived at the dwelling, he had held it in his hand and looked at it carefully. It was slightly bruised now because Asher had dropped it several times, but there was nothing at all unusual about the apple. He had held a magnifying glass to it. He had tossed it several times across the room, watching, and then rolled it around and around on his desktop, waiting for the thing to happen again. But it hadn't. The only thing that had happened was the announcement later that evening over the speaker, the announcement that had singled him out without using his name, that has caused both of his parents to glance meaningfully at his desk where the apple still lay. Now, sitting at his desk, staring at his schoolwork as his family hovered over the new child in its basket, he shook his head, trying to forget the odd incident. He forced himself to arrange his papers and try to study a little before the evening meal. The new child, Gabriel, stirred and whimpered, and Father spoke softly to Lily, explaining the feeding procedure as he opened the container that held the formula and the equipment. The evening proceeded as all evenings did in the family unit, in the dwelling, in the community, quiet, reflective, a time for renewal and preparation for the day to come. It was different only in the addition to it of the new child with his pale, solemn, knowing eyes. All right, chapter 3, pretty short chapter, but we learn a little bit more about this. First up, we learn that Jonas is different than the other members of his community, and so is the little child Gabe that his father brings home. The biggest thing that makes them very different is his eyes, right? Everyone in the community is supposed to look the same, right? Specifically, they all have dark eyes. There's not a single person in the community who has pale eyes except for Jonas, the child that his father just brought home, and another girl who's a 5. And they all have these pale eyes. And it's very different. And it's Jonas is kind of angry that Lily even brings it up because she's not really supposed to, right? It's rude to call attention to those things, you know, specifically like what makes people different, right? And I think they do that because they don't want anyone to feel different than anyone else or feel like excluded. There's like no room for discrimination then. But it also means that, you know, you're supposed to be the same. Like the community values sameness as a community. Like that's a big value, is to kind of make sure everybody's together, the same. But Jonas, you know, kind of mentions that this is a very different look. When you look at someone with pale eyes, you look different than other people. And we also learned that because of this could be, he's seeing things, right? Maybe because of his eyes, because of his difference, he's seeing things that other people can't see, which is this apple, right? That he ends up taking home and ends up getting in trouble for. Because when he's playing with this apple with Asher, it changes somehow when he's throwing it. And he can't really describe what's changing about it. He just sees it changing. And nobody else seems to notice this change, and it doesn't really happen again. And he's just so confused by it. I wish we could read chapter 7. Oh, did you read chapter 7, Macho Man? Did you read chapter 7? We'll see. I have technically already made the thumbnail for only chapter 6. So we will see if we make it to chapter 6, we'll see where we're at, if it's a good stopping place or not. It's my favorite chapter in the book. Okay, interesting. All right, well, we'll see when we get there. We're planned to get to at least through chapter 6. Okay. The other thing that we learned in this chapter is about the speaker, right? We know that that's another job in the community, just like nurturer and cleaners and, justice people, right? Like the speaker is a job that is involved in the community, and their job is basically to call people out without saying their name. So like if you do something wrong, if you break a rule that's like a minor rule, like not removing objects from their designated areas, then you're going to get called out. And it's like they call you out in kind of a general way, but everybody knows that they're talking about you. Like the announcement about females under 9, that hair ribbons are to be neatly tied, right? And then Jonas, like all male 11s, right? So they don't say your name, but they say something specific enough about you that you're like, oh, they're talking to me and I have to go, I broke a rule. I've got to go like apologize for it or whatever. And it's interesting because even reading this chapter again, I noticed that like your parents aren't even involved in that kind of like chastisement. I mean, maybe one-on-one, but like it seems like a lot of the rules that get broken, they deal with as a community, right? Like nobody's trying to say, oh, you have to, pull them aside and chastise them. Like they don't say them out loud. It's just like said out like over the speaker, right? As a reminder. And it's like your first warning for like breaking the rule. They'll call you out in general, which is interesting. I think that's really, really interesting because like in our community, that doesn't happen, right? Like parents are usually in charge for telling their kids what rules they should and shouldn't break. But even when Jonas brings the apple home, his parents don't say anything to him. Like it's the speaker who says something and who calls him out and who recognizes it. His parents aren't even involved in that kind of like process for him. So that's interesting. The only other thing I wanted to talk about in this chapter was birth mothers. We learn about birth mothers. So we do know that babies are born naturally in this community because they're born from a birth mother. Lily even says, I would want to become a birth mother. I wish I could get assigned a birth mother. But Lily's mom says to her, don't say that because there's very little honor in that assignment, which is interesting because like the only way for the community to get new children is through birth mothers, but nobody in the community seems to like think it's a good job, right? Specifically, her mother says there's only 3 years. When you work as a birth mother, you only do 3 years as a birth mother for 3 births. You only go through 3, and that's it. And then after that, you have to go into hard labor for the rest of your adult life until you go to be an old person and be taken care of as an old person. And which seems like, I mean, if you think about it, like 3 years versus however many long years you live, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, like you're going to be doing hard labor for the rest of that time. So it is interesting to see that they look down on birth mothers. People look down on them. And also like, it's kind of one of those jobs where it's like, oh, you have to go work after you're become a birth mother. You're done giving babies, you're done making babies. So go be a worker, go be a hard labor worker. So I guess birth mothers are not, it's almost like birth mothers are not really like the smartest people, right? And I say that with quotes because it's like the elders see them and it's like, okay, well, they can't be an engineer, they can't be a nurturer, they can't be a doctor, they can't be a teacher or something like that. But like, well, I guess they can go be a birth mother and they can at least give children, new children to the community. So it's like almost like birth mothers really aren't supposed to be the brightest people in the community. Macho Man, that's what you want to be. Yeah, I remember you telling me that. I remember you saying you wanted to be a birth mother. 3 years of total laziness and then 50 or 60 hard years of working in the fields or chopping wood or something or building things, like hard labor. Go for it. Why not? Yeah. But I mean, Lily does have a point, right? They do take care of the birth mothers. It's 3 good years because you get really good food. You're really well taken care of. You have very gentle exercise periods and you can just kind of chill out while you're waiting to have the baby. So it's like kind of nice. It's kind of nice to be a birth mother, like for those 3 years that you're actually doing it. Okay. So those are the big things that we learn from this chapter. And some big clues, again, to the community, as well as also big clues to Jonas in particular. He is very special, right? He has, not only does he have a difference with his eyes being different, but also because he's starting to see things, right? He's starting to see like almost not, I don't want to say hallucinate, but yeah, almost, because things are changing. He's the only one seeing it and he's the only one experiencing it. It's interesting. Okay, getting into chapter 4. Here we go. Reaching our second hour. We have a few chapters left. All right, chapter 4. Jonas rode at a leisurely pace, glancing at the bike ports beside the buildings to see if he could spot Asher's. He didn't often do his volunteer hours with his friend because Asher frequently fooled around and made serious work a little difficult. But now, with 12 coming so soon and the volunteer hours ending, it didn't seem to matter. The freedom to choose where to spend those hours had always been a wonderful luxury to Jonas. Freedom to choose had been a wonderful luxury to Jonas. Other hours of the day were so carefully regulated. I want to switch these. He remembered when he had become an 8, as Lily would do shortly, and had been faced with that freedom of choice. The 8s would always set out on their first volunteer hour a little nervously, giggling and staying in groups of friends. They almost invariably did their hours on recreation duty first, helping with other younger ones in a place where they still felt comfortable, but with guidance as they developed self-confidence and maturity. They moved on to other jobs, gravitating toward those that would suit their own interests and skill. A male 11 named Benjamin had done his entire nearly 4 years in the rehabilitation center, working with citizens who had been injured. It was rumored that he was as skilled now as the rehabilitation directors themselves, and that he had even developed some machines and methods to hasten rehabilitation. There was no doubt that Benjamin would receive his assignment to that field and would probably be permitted to bypass most of the training. Jonas was impressed by the things Benjamin had achieved. He knew him, of course, since they had always been group mates, but they had never talked about the boy's accomplishments because such a conversation would have been awkward for Benjamin. There was never any comfortable way to mention or discuss one's successes without breaking the rule against bragging. Oh, that's a rule I didn't remember to talk about. We're going to come back to that one. even if one didn't mean to. It was a minor rule, rather like rudeness, punishable only by a gentle chastisement. But still, better to steer clear of an occasion governed by a rule which would be so easy to break. The area of dwellings behind him, Jonas rode past the community structures, hoping to spot Asher's bicycle parked beside one of the small factories or office buildings. He passed the child care center where Lily stayed after school and the play areas surrounding it. He rode through the central plaza and the large auditorium where public meetings were held. Jonas slowed and looked at the name tags on the bicycles lined up outside the nurturing center. Then he checked those outside the food distribution. It was always fun to help with deliveries, and he hoped he would find his friend there so they could go together on daily rounds, carrying the cartons of supplies into dwellings of the community. But he finally found Asher's bicycle leaning as usual instead of upright in its port, as it should have been outside the house of the old. There was only one other child's bicycle there, that of a female 11 named Fiona. Jonas liked Fiona. Ooh. She was a good student, quiet and polite, but she had a sense of fun as well. I don't think that's supposed to be like. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But Jonas liked Fiona, I guess in a friendly way, maybe. She was a good student, quiet and polite, but she had a sense of fun as well, and it didn't surprise him that she was working with Asher today. He parked his bicycle neatly in the port beside theirs and entered the building. "Hello, Jonas," the attendant at the front desk said. She handed him the sign-up sheet and stamped her own official seal behind his signature. All of his volunteer hours would be carefully tabulated at the Hall of Open Records. Once, long ago, it was whispered among the children that an 11 had arrived at the ceremony of 12, only to hear a public announcement that he had not completed the required number of volunteer hours and would not, therefore, be given his assignment. He had been permitted an additional month in which to complete the hours and given his assignment privately with no applause, no celebration, a disgrace that had clouded his entire future. It was good to have some volunteers here. It's good to have some volunteers here today, the attendant told him. We celebrated a release this morning, and that always throws the schedule off a little, so things get backed up. She looked at the printed sheet. Let's see. Asher and Fiona are helping in the bathing room. Why don't you join them there? You know where it is, don't you? Jonas nodded, thanked her, and walked down the long hallway. He glanced into the rooms on either side. The old were sitting quietly, some visiting and talking with one another, others doing handiwork and some simple crafts. A few were asleep. Each room was comfortably furnished, the floors covered with thick carpeting. It was a serene, slow-paced place, unlike the busy centers of manufacture and distribution where the daily work of the community occurred. Jonas was glad that he had, over the years, chosen to do his hours in a variety of places, so he could experience the differences. He realized, though, that not focusing on one area meant he was left with not the slightest idea, even a guess, of what his assignment would be. He laughed softly, thinking about the ceremony again, Jonas, he teased himself, but he suspected that the date was so near, probably all of his friends were, too. He passed a caretaker walking slowly with one of the old in the hall. "Hello, Jonas," the young uniformed man said, smiling pleasantly. The woman beside him, whose arm he held, was hunched over as she shuffled along in her soft slippers. She looked toward Jonas and smiled, but her dark eyes were clouded and blank. He realized she was blind. He entered the bathing room with its warm, moist air and scent of cleansing lotions. He removed his tunic, hung it carefully on a wall hook, and put on a volunteer's smock that was folded on a shelf. "Hi, Jonas," Asher called from the corner where he was kneeling beside a tub. Jonas saw Fiona nearby at a different tub. She looked up and smiled at him, but she was busy gently washing a man who lay in the warm water. Jonas greeted them and the caretaking attendants at work nearby. Then he went to the row of padded lounging chairs where others of the old were waiting. He had worked here before. He knew what to do. "Your turn, Larissa," he said, reading the name tag on the woman's robe. "I'll just start the water, and then I'll help you up." He pressed the button on the nearby empty tub and watched as the warm water flowed in through the many small openings on the sides. The tub would be filled in a minute, and the water's flow would stop automatically. He helped the woman from the chair, led her to the tub, removed her robe, and steadied her with his hand on her arm as she stepped in and lowered herself. She leaned back and sighed with pleasure, her head on a soft cushioned headdress. Comfortable? He asked, and she nodded, her eyes closed. Jonas, squeezing cleansing lotion onto a clean sponge at the edge of the tub, began to wash her frail body. Last night, he had watched as his father bathed the new child. This was much the same. The fragile skin, the soothing water, the gentle motion of his hand, slippery with soap, the relaxed, peaceful smile on the woman's face reminded him of Gabriel being bathed. Okay, here we go. We're getting into a little bit of a interesting part of this book. There's nothing supposed to be at all anywhere like what am I trying to say? Okay, let me just say it. There's nothing supposed to be anything that's supposed to be sexual about this, okay? Like, the fact that we just read this paragraph right here, which says that doing this activity, Jonas, what he's doing, reminds him of Gabriel being bathed, is exactly how you know the parameters of this situation, okay? Right? Like, he is thinking bathing this old woman is just like bathing a baby. And it's very true, right? When we are babies, we have to be taken care of. We have to be bathed by our parents. When we are very old, we get to a point where we can't bathe ourselves like we have, right? Like our bodies just have started to break down, right? We don't have the muscle mass anymore. We don't have the flexibility we used to have, right? So we need help keeping ourselves clean, okay? Just putting that out there for everybody in here who's like, nakedness, okay? That's what this is, all right? It's the same thing as washing a baby, washing an old person. They're like the same thing. Okay, back to this. Thank you. And the nakedness, too. It was against the rules for children or adults to look at another's nakedness, but the rule did not apply to new children or the old. Jonas was glad. It was a nuisance to keep oneself covered while changing for games, and the required apology if one had by mistake glimpsed another's body was always awkward. He couldn't see why it was necessary. He liked the feeling of safety here in this warm and quiet room. He liked the expression of trust on the woman's face as she lay in the water unprotected, exposed, and free. From the corner of his eye, he could see his friend Fiona help the old man from the tub and tenderly pat his thin, naked body dry with an absorbent cloth. She helped him into his robe. Jonas thought Larissa had drifted to sleep, as the old often did, and he was careful to keep his motion steady and gentle so he wouldn't wake her. He was surprised when she spoke, her eyes still closed. This morning we celebrated the release of Roberto, she told him. It was wonderful. I knew Roberto, Jonas said. I helped with his feeding last time I was here, just a few weeks ago. He was a very interesting man. Larissa opened her eyes happily. They told his whole life before they released him, she said. They always do. But to be honest, she whispered with a mischievous look, some of the tellings are a little boring. I've even seen some of the old fall asleep during tellings when they released Edna recently. Did you know Edna? Jonas shook his head. He couldn't recall anyone named Edna. Well, they tried to make her life sound meaningful, and of course, she added primly, all lives are meaningful. I don't mean that they aren't. But Edna, my goodness. She was a birth mother, and then she worked in food production for years until she came here. She never even had a family unit. Larissa lifted her head and looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then she confided, I don't think Edna was very smart. Jonas laughed. He rinsed her left arm, laid it back into the water, and began to wash her feet. She murmured with pleasure as she massaged her feet with the sponge. But Roberto's life was wonderful, Larissa went on after a moment. He had been an instructor of 11s. You know how important that is. And he had been on the planning committee. And goodness, I don't know how he found the time. He also raised 2 very successful children. And he was also the one who did the landscaping design for the Central Plaza. He didn't do the actual labor, of course. Now you're back. Lean forward and I'll help you sit up. Jonas put his arm around her and supported her as she sat. He squeezed the sponge against her back and began to rub her sharp-boned shoulders. Tell me about the celebration. Well, there was the telling of his life. That's always first. Then the toast. We raised our glasses and cheered. We chanted the anthem. He made a lovely goodbye speech, and several of us made little speeches wishing him well. I didn't, though. I've never been fond of public speaking. He was thrilled. You should have seen the look on his face when they let him go. Jonas slowed the strokes of his hand on her back thoughtfully. Larissa, he asked, what happens when they make the actual release? Where exactly did Roberto go? She lifted her bare, wet shoulders in a small shrug. I don't know. I don't think anybody does, except for the committee. He just bowed to all of us and then walked, like they all do, through the special door in the releasing room. But you should have seen his look. Pure happiness, I'd call it. Jonas grinned. I wish I'd been there to see it. Larissa frowned. I don't know why they don't let children come. Not enough room, I guess. They should enlarge the releasing room. We'll have to suggest that to the committee. Maybe they'll study it, Jonas said slyly, and Larissa chortled with laughter. Right, she hooted, and Jonas helped her from the tub. Okay, chapter 4, again, some really interesting information that we get about the world, specifically volunteer hours. So it seems like children's education in their childhood years, by the time they're going through the ceremonies, is kind of separated into these categories where they go from being in school and having like recreation hours after school to being in school and then having volunteer hours after school after they become an 8. So from 8 to 12, they're volunteering all around the community in different jobs or in jobs that they find particularly interesting. And then by the time they're at 12, that's when they get their assignment and they go to school during the day, but then they also go into training after school. So, and then eventually they're just in their job, right? They don't have any more school after a certain time. I guess depending on the job. I think they talk about it a little bit later in the book, but there is a certain amount of school that each of them have to do after they turn 12, but it's limited based on what job you get and what training you have to do. So we learn about that, and obviously Jonas goes to meet with his friends. He does his volunteer hours with his friends, and he says even like volunteer hours are a really good way to tell what kind of assignment you're going to get in the ceremony. But Jonas doesn't know. Jonas doesn't know because he's done his volunteer hours at a whole bunch of different places, right? To get an experience of a bunch of different things. And he says he likes that because he likes to experience all the different stuff, but he doesn't think it's going to help him understand what he's going to get assigned. Okay, so he bathes Larissa, and I already talked about the whole like comparing it to a baby kind of thing. But then Larissa talks about this release, the ceremony of release that they did for one of the people in the House of the Old named Roberto. And she talks about how they tell his whole life and they make a toast and everybody cheers and he makes a speech. And then she talks about how they chanted the anthem, and that's going to come up later, but about what this anthem is that they chant when somebody's released. And then he goes into a room and doesn't come out. And it's really important because even if you know what release is by this point, even if you figured it out as the reader, nobody in the community knows what release really is, right? They just think they leave and they don't come back, right? It's something like you don't come back from, right? So we know what happens when it's sad, when it's a punishment or it's a child. We know that they're released, they go somewhere, they don't come back. But for old people, it's a happy time, right? Like even Larissa says, like when he goes into the releasing room, he's just so happy, right? Like, cause he's had such a full life and he's really, really had a great time. Cause he did have a full life. He was a teacher of 11s, instructor of 11s. We know that's a job in the community, instructor for the children. And he was on the planning committee. He had a good life. Even Larissa says it was wonderful just to hear them talk about his life because it was so interesting. And he was happy when they released him, right? But nobody really knows what it is, right? Jonas asks Larissa, what actually do they actually do? Where does Roberto go? And she's like, I don't know. I guess the committee probably knows, but we don't know, right? Again, this idea of the committee being these people somewhere knowing information above them, but not sharing all of that information with the people in the community. The other thing that we learn about in this chapter is a little bit more about birth mothers, right? Larissa talks about a woman who had been released recently and she had been a birth mother, and they talk about her life and they talk about how boring it was, basically, right? She was a birth mother, and then she worked in food production, and she didn't even have a family unit. This is a really interesting clue because the fact that she was a birth mother and she didn't actually even get to raise children, right? Like she just birthed them. That's it. That's all she did. She didn't even have a spouse, and she didn't even get to raise children with a spouse on her own. So again, more clues that indicate that the birth mother job isn't really a job that, people in the community want, because it's boring. You're not really seen of as like a smart person. Even Larissa says, I don't think Edna was very smart. And they probably choose people who aren't very smart because they don't think that they're going to contribute a lot to the community outside of children to the community. So again, learning about the birth mother idea of this job and what it actually entails and how people view it is really interesting. And then again, how people view release 2 in this chapter. Okay, moving right along. Chapter 5. And we're getting close. What's our time? Okay, good. We're doing pretty good on time. Chapter 5. We'll see about Chapter 7, Macho Man. We will see. I have to take a look at my other book just to see where it is and what's involved in Chapter 7. Honestly, I might be saving it for the next stream. Let's see. Okay, Chapter 5. Usually, at the morning ritual, when the family members told their dreams, Jonas didn't contribute much. He rarely dreamed. Wait, hang on. So here we go. The morning ritual is different than the evening ritual. In the morning, they tell their dreams to each other. They share their dreams around the breakfast table. Jonas didn't contribute much. He rarely dreamed. Sometimes he awoke with a feeling of fragments afloat in his sleep, but he couldn't seem to grasp them and put them together into something worthy of telling at the ritual. But this morning was different. He had dreamed very vividly the night before. His mind wandered while Lily, as usual, recounted a lengthy dream, this one a frightening one in which she had against the rules been riding her mother's bicycle and been caught by security guards. They all listened carefully and discussed with Lily the warning the dream had given. "Thank you for your dream, Lily," Jonas said the standard phrase automatically and tried to pay better attention while his mother told of a dream fragment, a disquieting scene where she had been chastised for a rule infraction she didn't understand. Together, they agreed that it probably resulted from her feelings when she had reluctantly dealt punishment to the citizen who had broken the major rules a second time. Father said he had had no dreams. Gabe, Father asked, looking down at the basket where the new child lay gurgling after his feeding, ready to be taken back to the nurturing center for the day. They all laughed. Dream telling began with threes. If new children dreamed, no one knew. Jonas, Mother asked. They always asked, though they knew how rarely Jonas had a dream to tell. "I did dream last night," Jonas told them. He shifted in his chair, frowning. "Good," Father said. "Tell us." "The details aren't clear, really," Jonas explained, trying to recreate the odd dream in his mind. "I think I was in the bathing room at the House of the Old. That's where you were yesterday," Father pointed out. Jonas nodded, but it wasn't really the same. There was a tub in the dream, but only one. And the real bathing room has rows and rows of them, but the room in the dream was warm and damp, and I had taken off my tunic, but I hadn't put on the smock, so my chest was bare. I was perspiring because it was so warm. And Fiona was there, the way she was yesterday. "Asher too?" Mother asked. Jonas shook his head. "No, it was only me and Fiona alone in the room, standing beside the tub." She was laughing, but I wasn't. I was almost a little angry at her in my dream because she wasn't taking me seriously. "Seriously about what?" Lily asked. Jonas looked at his plate. For some reason that he didn't understand, he felt slightly embarrassed. "I think I was trying to convince her that she should get into the tub of water." He paused. He knew he had to tell it all. That it was not only all right, but necessary to tell all of the dream. So he forced himself to relate the part that made him uneasy. I wanted her to take off her clothes and get into the tub, he explained quickly. I wanted to bathe her. I had a sponge in my hand, but she wouldn't. She kept laughing and saying no. He looked up at his parents. That's all, he said. Can you describe the strongest feeling in your dream, son? Father asked. Jonas thought about it. The details were murky and vague, but the feelings were clear and flooded him again now as he thought. The wanting, he said. I knew that she wouldn't, and I think I knew that she shouldn't, but I wanted it so terribly. I could feel the wanting all through me. Thank you for your dream, Jonas, Mother said after a moment. She glanced at Father. Lily, Father said, it's time to leave for school. Would you walk beside me this morning and keep an eye on the new child's basket? I want to be certain he doesn't wiggle himself loose. Jonas began to rise to collect his school books. He thought it surprising that they hadn't talked about his dream at length before the thank you. Perhaps they found it as confusing as he had. Wait, Jonas, Mother said gently. I'll write an apology to your instructor so that you won't have to speak for one for being late. He sank back down into his chair, puzzled. He waved to Father and Lily as they left the dwelling, carrying Gabe in his basket. He watched while Mother tidied the remains of the morning meal and placed the tray by the front door for the collection crew. Finally, she sat down beside him at the table. Jonas, she said with a smile, the feeling you describe as the wanting? It was your first stirrings. Father and I have been expecting it to happen to you. It happens to everyone. It happened to Father when he was your age. And it happened to me. It will someday happen to Lily. Stirrings. He had heard the word before. He remembered that there was a reference to the stirrings in the Book of Rules, though he didn't remember what it said. And now and then the speaker mentioned it. Attention, a reminder that stirrings must be reported in order for treatment to take place. He had always ignored that announcement because he didn't understand it, and it never seemed to apply to him in any way. He ignored, as most citizens did, many of the commands and reminders read by the speaker. Do I have to report it? He asked to his mother. She laughed. You did, in the dream telling. That's enough. But what about the treatment? The speaker says the treatment must take place. Jonas felt miserable. Just when the ceremony was about to happen, his ceremony of 12, would he have to go away someplace for treatment just because of a stupid dream? But his mother laughed again in a reassuring, affectionate way. No, she said. It's just the pills. You're ready for the pills. That's all. That's the treatment for the stirrings. Jonas brightened. He knew about pills. His parents both took them each morning. And some of his friends did. He knew. Once he had been heading off to school with Asher, both of them on their bikes, when Asher's father had called from their dwelling doorway. You forgot your pill, Asher. Asher had groaned good-naturedly, turned his bike, and ridden back while Jonas waited. It was the sort of thing one didn't ask a friend about because it might have fallen into the uncomfortable category of being different. Asher took a pill each morning. Jonas did not. Always better, less rude, to talk about things that were the same. I'm going to come back to this. Always better, less rude. Drugs. No, yes and no, Macho Man. Yes and no. So there is no drugs in this community, like the kind of drugs that we think about in our community, in our world, right? Instead, they call it treatment, right? So in the same way that you would take a pill for a headache, or you would take medicine for like a cold or something, even taking medication, right? Like this would definitely fall under the umbrella of like medication, because his mom is presenting this idea of stirrings, right? Of like feelings are arising within you now that you are the age of 12, and we must treat those feelings because those feelings are not going to be allowed to basically be expressed in this world, right? We learned about in the previous chapter how it is against the rules for community members to look at each other when they're naked. Okay, right? Like that's the whole point of the bathtub scene, right? Is that the only time where you're allowed to see someone naked is if they're a baby or if they're an old person. And you can't see anyone naked if you are an adult or like a teen or a kid, right? So married couples do not see each other naked, right? The way that babies are born is through birth mothers. So there is no element of sexual feelings. That's what we're talking about here, right? There's no element of love. There's no element of like romance, right? There's nothing about that in this world. And if you do start to exhibit feelings of romance, which is what they call the stirrings, they take a medication to stop that from happening, right? So it's another way to control people, to keep people, to control them, to keep them less like involved with each other. But I think it also probably solves a lot of problems, right? So that people don't have these stirrings. Like it would be really awkward if two people had stirrings for the same person, because then it would cause conflict, right? People would be upset. It would cause, bad stuff to happen. It would cause fights, right? So it's easier to keep people not having those feelings and just doing their jobs day to day and having human connection in other ways, in like the family units and stuff. So, Jonas even mentioning the fact that he knows about them, he's heard about them before, his parents take them, his friend Asher started taking them, but he didn't ask anybody about it because it's one of those things that's like, it makes people different. And so it's better to just talk about things that are the same because it's not rude. You won't get in trouble if you're not asking a rude question, you don't mean to. So this is a big event in Jonas's life. At first he's worried. He's like super scared. Oh my God, this is going to happen right before the ceremony of 12. I have to take this treatment now. But he just learns, oh, it's just the pills, right? So everybody has done this. It happens to everyone. Even his mother says, it happened to your father. It happened to me. It's going to happen to Lily. It happens to everyone. All it means you just have to start taking the pills. And this is commonplace for him. It's normal for him. It almost makes him feel comfortable to know that he's going to start taking the pills because he knows it's just like what everybody else does. So he doesn't see it as any kind of problem, even though us as the reader might see this as a problem, right? As like drug use in a sense, or being drugged. Okay. Something to keep in mind. All right. Now he swallowed the small pill that his mother handed to him. That's all? He asked. That's all, she replied, returning the bottle to the cupboard. But you mustn't forget. I'll remind you for the first few weeks, but then you must do it on your own. If you forget, the stirrings will come back. The dreams of the stirrings will come back. Sometimes the dosage must be adjusted. Asher takes them, Jonas confided. His mother nodded, unsurprised. Many of your group mates probably do. The males, at least. They all will soon. Females, too. How long will I have to take them? Until you enter the house of the old, she explained. All of your adult life. But it becomes routine. After a while, you won't even pay much attention to it. She looked at her watch. If you leave right now, you won't even be late for school. Hurry along. And thank you, Jonas, she added as he went to the door, for your dream. Pedaling rapidly down the path, Jonas felt oddly proud to have joined those who took the pills. For a moment, though, he remembered the dream again. The dream had felt pleasurable. Though the feelings were confused, he thought that he had liked the feelings that his mother called the stirrings. He remembered that upon waking, he had wanted to feel the stirrings again. Then, in the same way that his own dwelling slipped away behind him as he rounded a corner on his bicycle, the dream slipped away from his thoughts. Very briefly, a little guiltily, he tried to grasp it back, but the feelings had disappeared. The stirrings were gone. So all indicators talking about the stirrings are, right. I have to give by. Okay, I understand, Macho Man. Thank you. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for your reading. Thank you. And I hope you come back and maybe obviously the next stream we'll get into chapter 7, your favorite chapter. Okay, so that was chapter 5. We're into our last chapter, chapter 6 of the stream. And look at that, it's not even 7 o'clock yet. Amazing. All right, chapter 6. Lily, please hold still, Mother said again. Lily, standing in front of her, fidgeted impatiently. I can tie them myself, she complained. I always have. I know that, Mother replied, straightening the hair ribbons on the little girl's braids. But I also know that they constantly come loose, and more often than not, they're dangling down your back by afternoon. Today, at least, we want them to be neatly tied and to stay neatly tied. I don't like hair ribbons. I'm glad I only have to wear them 1 more year, Lily said irritably. Next year, I get my bicycle too, she added more cheerfully. There are good things each year, Jonas reminded her. This year, you get to start your volunteer hours. And remember last year, when you became a 7, you were so happy to get your front button jacket. The little girl nodded and looked down at herself at the jacket with its row of large buttons. That designated her as a 7. 4s, 5s, and 6s all wore jackets that fastened down the back so that they would have to help each other dress and would learn interdependence. Front button jackets was the first sign of independence, the very first visible symbol of growing up. The bicycle at 9 would be the powerful emblem of moving gradually out into the community away from the protective family unit. Lily grinned and wriggled away from her mother. And this year you get your assignment, she said to Jonas in an exciting voice. I hope you get pilot, and then you can take me flying. Sure I will, said Jonas, and I'll get a special little parachute that just fits you, and I'll take you up to, maybe 20,000 feet and open the door and... Jonas, Mother warned. I was only joking, Jonas groaned. I don't want pilot anyway. Even if I get pilot, I'll put in an appeal. Come on, Mother said. She gave Lily's ribbons a final tug. Jonas, are you ready? Did you take your pill? I want to get a good seat in the auditorium. She prodded Lily to the front door and Jonas followed. It was a short ride to the auditorium, Lily waving to her friends from her seat on the back of her mother's bicycle. Jonas stowed his bicycle beside Mother's and made his way through the throng to find his group. The entire community attended the ceremony each year. For the parents, it meant 2 days' holiday from work. They sat together in the huge hall. Children sat with their groups until they went one by one to the stage. Father, though, would not join Mother in the audience right away. For the earliest ceremony, the naming, the nurturers brought the new children to the stage. I'm sorry, I'm just highlighting stuff that I can come back to here. Jonas, from his place in the balcony with the 11s, searched the auditorium for a glimpse of Father. It wasn't at all hard to spot the nurturers section at the front. Coming from it were the wails and howls of the new children who sat squirming on the nurturers' laps. At every other public ceremony, the audience was silent and attentive. But once a year, they all smiled indulgently at the commotion from the little ones waiting to receive their names and families. Jonas finally caught his father's eye and waved. Father grinned and waved back, then held up the hand of the new child on his lap, making it wave too. It wasn't Gabriel. Gabe was back at the nurturing center today, being cared for by the night crew. He had been given an unusual and special reprieve from the committee, and granted an additional year of nurturing before his naming and placement. Father had gone before the committee with a plea on behalf of Gabriel, who had not yet gained the weight appropriate to his days of life, nor begun to sleep soundly at night to be placed with his family unit. Normally, such a new child would be labeled inadequate and released from the community. Instead, as a result of Father's plea, Gabriel had been labeled uncertain and given an additional year. He would continue to be nurtured at the center and would spend his nights with Jonas's family unit. Each family member, including Lily, had been required to sign a pledge that they would not become attached to this little temporary guest, and that they would relinquish him without protest or appeal. Without protest or appeal when he was assigned to his own family unit at next year's ceremony. At least, Jonas thought, after Gabriel was placed next year, they would still see him often because he would be a part of the community. If he were released, they would not see him again, ever. Those that were released, even as new children, were sent elsewhere and never returned to the community. Father had not had to release a single new child this year, so Gabriel would have represented a real failure and sadness. Even Jonas, though he didn't hover over the little one the way Lily and his father did, was glad that Gabe had not been released. The first ceremony began right on time, and Jonas watched as one after another each new child was given a name and handed by the nurturers to its family unit. For some, it was a first child, but many came to the stage accompanied by another child beaming with pride to receive a little brother or sister the way Jonas had when he was about to be a 5. Asher poked Jonas's arm. "Remember when we got Philippa?" he asked in a low whisper. Jonas nodded. It had only been last year. Asher's parents had waited quite a long time before applying for a second child. Maybe, Jonas suspected, they had been so exhausted by Asher's lively foolishness that they had needed a little time. Lively, if you watch this, I accidentally put you in the book. 2 of their group, Fiona and another female named Thea, were missing temporarily, waiting with their parents to receive new children. But it was rare that there was such an age gap between children in a family unit. When her family's ceremony was completed, Fiona took the seat that had been saved for her in the row ahead of Asher and Jonas. She turned and whispered to them. "He's cute, but I don't like his name very much." She made a face and giggled. Fiona's new brother had been named Bruno. It wasn't a great name, Jonas thought, like, well, Gabriel, for example, but it was okay. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each naming, rose in an exuberant swell when one parental pair, glowing with pride, took a male new child and heard him named Caleb. This new Caleb was a replacement child. The couple had lost their first Caleb, a cheerful little 4. Loss of a child was very, very rare. The community was extraordinarily safe, each citizen watchful and protective of all children. But somehow the first little Caleb had wandered away unnoticed and fallen into the river. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together, murmuring the name Caleb throughout an entire day, less and less frequently, softer in volume as the long and somber day went on, so that the little 4 seemed to fade away gradually from everyone's mind, everyone's consciousness. Now, at this special naming, the community performed the brief murmur of replacement ceremony, repeating the name for the first time since the loss, softly and softly at first, then faster with greater volume, as the couple stood on the stage with the new child sleeping in the mother's arms. It was as if the first Caleb were returning. Another new child was given the name Roberto, and Jonas remembered that Roberto the Old had been released only last week. But there was no murmur of replacement ceremony for the new little Roberto. Release was not the same as loss. He sat politely through the ceremonies of 2 and 3 and 4, increasingly bored as he was each year. Then a break for midday meal, served outdoors, and back again to the seats for the 5s, for the 5s, 6s, 7s, and finally the last of the first day's ceremonies, the 8s. Jonas watched and cheered as Lily marched proudly to the stage, became an 8, and received the identifying jacket that she would wear this year. This one with smaller buttons and, for the first time, pockets, indicating that she was mature enough now to keep track of her own small belongings. Wait a minute, sorry. Okay, so she was an 8 and received that she would wear this year. This one had smaller buttons and pockets. Okay. So 8s receive volunteer hours, they get their comfort object taken, and they get a new jacket with pockets, that she could carry her own stuff, basically. She stood solemnly listening to the speech of firm instructions on the responsibilities of 8 and doing volunteer hours for the first time. But Jonas could see that Lily, though she seemed attentive, was looking longingly at the row of gleaming bicycles, which would be presented tomorrow morning to the 9s. Next year, Lily Billy, Jonas thought. It was an exhausting day, and even Gabriel, retrieved in his basket from the nurturing center, slept soundly that night. Finally, it was the morning of the ceremony of 12. Now Father sat beside Mother in the audience. Jonas could see them applauding dutifully as the 9s, one by one, wheeled their new bicycles, each with its gleaming name tag attached to the back from the stage. He knew that his parents cringed a little as he did when Fritz, who lived in the dwelling next door to theirs, received his bike and almost immediately bumped into the podium with it. Fritz was a very awkward child who had been summoned for chastisement again and again. His transgressions were small ones, always. Shoes on the wrong feet, schoolwork misplaced, failure to study adequately for a quiz. But each such error reflected negatively on his parents' guidance and infringed on the community's sense of order and success. Jonas and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled neatly into its port. Finally, the Nines were all resettled in their seats, each having wheeled a bicycle outside where it would be waiting for its owner at the end of each day. Or at the end of the day. Everyone always chuckled and made small jokes when the Nines rode home for the first time. "Want me to show you how to ride?" older friends would call. "I know you've never been on a bike before," but invariably the grinning Nines, who in technical violation of the rule had been practicing secretly for weeks, would mount and ride off in perfect balance, training wheels never touching the ground. Then the 10s. Jonas never found the ceremony of 10 particularly interesting. Only time-consuming, as each child's hair was snipped neatly into its distinguishing cut. Females lost their braids at 10, and males too relinquished their long childish hair and took on a more manly short style, which exposed their ears. Laborers moved quickly to the stage with brooms and swept away the mounds of discarded hair. Jonas could see the parents of the new 10s stir and murmur, and he knew that this evening, in many dwellings, they would be snipping and straightening the hastily done haircuts, trimming them into a neater line. 11s. It seemed a short time ago that Jonas had undergone the ceremony of 11, but he remembered that it was not one of the more interesting ones. By 11, one was only waiting to be 12. It was simply a marking of time with no meaningful changes. There was new clothing, different garments for females whose bodies were beginning to change, and longer trousers for male, with a specially shaped pocket for the small calculator they would use this year in school. But those were simply presented in wrapped packages without an accompanying speech. Break for midday meal. Jonas realized he was hungry. He and his groupmates congregated by the tables in front of the auditorium and took their packaged food. Yesterday, they had been merriment at lunch, a lot of teasing and energy, but today the group stood anxiously separate from the other children. Jonas watched the new 9s gravitate toward their waiting bicycles, each one admiring his or her name tag. He saw the 10s stroking their new shortened hair, the females shaking their heads to feel the unaccustomed lightness without the heavy braids they had worn so long. "I heard about a guy who was absolutely certain he was going to be assigned engineer," Asher muttered as they ate. "And instead, they gave him sanitation laborer. He went out the next day and jumped into the river, swam across, and joined the next community he came to. Nobody ever saw him again." Jonas laughed. "Somebody made that story up, Ash," he said. "My father said he heard that story when he was a 12. But Asher wasn't reassured. He was eyeing the river where it was visible behind the auditorium. "I can't even swim very well," he said. "My swimming instructor said that I don't have the right boyishness or something." "Buoyancy," Jonas corrected him. I love that Asher always messes up these words because it is so funny when he does. Buoyancy. "Whatever, I don't have it. I sink." "Anyway," Jonas pointed out, "have you ever once known of anyone, I mean, really known for sure, Asher, not just heard a story about it, who joined another community?" "No," Asher admitted reluctantly. "But you can. It says so in the rules. If you don't fit in, you could apply for elsewhere and be released. My mother says that once, about 10 years ago, someone applied and was gone the next day." Then he chuckled. "She told me that because I was driving her crazy. She threatened to apply for elsewhere." She was joking. "I know, but it was true. What she said, that someone did that once. She said that it was really true. Here today and gone tomorrow, never seen again, not even a ceremony of release." Jonas shrugged. It didn't worry him. How could someone not fit in? The community was so meticulously ordered, the choices so carefully made. Even the matching of spouses was given such weighty consideration that sometimes an adult who applied to receive a spouse waited months or even years before a match was approved and announced. All of the factors, disposition, energy level, intelligence, interests, had to correspond and interact perfectly. Jonas's mother, for example, had higher intelligence than his father, but his father had a calmer disposition. They balanced each other. Their match, which like all matches, had been monitored by the committee of elders for 3 years before they could apply for children, had always been a successful one. Like the matching of spouses and the naming and placement of new children, the assignments were scrupulously thought through by the committee of elders. He was certain that his assignment, whatever it was to be, and Asher's too, would be the right one for them. He only wished that their midday break would conclude and the audience would re-enter the auditorium and the suspense would end. As if in answer to his unspoken wish, the signal came and the crowd began to move toward the doors. Okay, I did say that we were going to stop here, but let's first go back into the chapter, right? So we get a little more information specifically about what happens at all of the ceremonies, right? And it does seem like they do really save the ceremony of 12 for last, like even putting a lunch break in between the other ceremonies and this one. And it's a 2-day event. So first is obviously the naming and placement of the little baby children, their children to their families. And then it seems like, okay, let me see if I can go back to the ones, because that's where I want to find out what happens to the ones. Okay, so, the ones get placed. So the twos, let's go back really quick to the ones. So we talk about specifically the families getting a child, right? And how that kind of works. And it doesn't really seem to be like a set time period in which you're supposed to get a new child. Like if you get a new one, you don't have to wait. Like you can choose when you want to get your next one. Like Asher's parents waited a long time. Fiona's parents waited a long time before getting their new child. But they also talk about a replacement child because a couple had previously lost their child. They had lost a 4-year-old boy named Caleb, and he had wandered off and drowned in a river. And it was very rare, never really happens because the community is so safe, but he was lost, he drowned. And so they did a ceremony of loss where they murmur Caleb's name more quietly throughout the day, symbolizing his basically his life being diminished and kind of leaving the community, like kind of letting him leave their overall vocabulary and their overall lives, right? But they had they replaced that child with a new child that they named Caleb, and they give to the same parents, almost like the parents get a restart on their child. It's rare, so it's not like it happens all the time, but it is something that is really interesting that the community does. They didn't seem to punish the parents, right? It didn't seem like it was anybody's fault that the child died, but they are at least going to try again with this parental unit to have a new Caleb join their family. And they do a murmur of replacement ceremony where they murmur the name louder and louder and louder, like he is returning. This is kind of creepy, right? It's almost like it says, like Caleb himself was released from their consciousness. Like they completely forgot about this original Caleb that fell into the river, even though clearly they didn't completely forget. Jonas is remembering it. But then when they get the new child, it's like he's being replaced and they get a new Caleb, almost like he's like coming back to life, which is kind of weird, but also kind of interesting how they do that. It does seem to make the community happy to know that the new child almost gets like a redo, but it's not really the same new child. Kind of weird. Okay, let's get into, so the twos, I'm trying to figure out, what do the twos get? It doesn't say what the twos get, or the threes, or the fours, and it doesn't seem to really matter because they don't really remember what happens in those ceremonies anyway. Jonas even says he doesn't remember how, the ceremonies until he was about 4. So then they come back for the 5s, 6s, and 7s, and the 8s. The 8s get a new jacket with pockets, and then the 9s get their hair cut, right? No, wait. Who gets their haircut? Maybe the 10s. No, it's the 10s get their haircut. So the 9s get their bicycle and the 10s get their haircut. The girls lose their braids, and then guys too also go for a more boy haircut, more like manly haircut. And it's, they even say, which is interesting because it's almost like a chop, they like just chop them off real quick. Cause then at home, the parents are going to be the ones to like make it nice and neat and cut it up and make it look pretty, make it look better. And then the 11s, again, Jonas says doesn't seem like it's really that important, but the 11s, they get new clothes too, undergarments specifically. And again, this is where the second time it's mentioned about their bodies changing. Not only are their bodies changing, but the stirrings are occurring around this time as well, around 11, 12, because that's when Jonas's stirrings start. He starts taking the pills. Girls start new undergarments, boys get new trousers, and then they all get a new pocket in their trousers so they can carry around their calculator, which they're going to need for their classes, which is kind of interesting. They would all get a pocket calculator. What do you learn in math at 11 years old? Do you learn to use a calculator then? I guess so. I guess you're learning more advanced math. I don't know. I'm not really into math, so I can't really think about it too much. But yeah, I guess you're learning more advanced math at 11. And then you have the 12s obviously getting their assignments. And they save it for the last. They save it specifically like a whole special event. Like they do all the rest of the ceremonies on the one day, on the second morning, and then they have lunch, almost like they're like building everybody up for this big final event for the 12s. Asher does mention that if he didn't like his assignment, he could always jump in the river and try to swim to the next community. And this is where they come up for the talking about applying to be released, right? Like if you don't fit in with the community, you want to leave the community, you can apply for release. And Jonas is like, that doesn't seem real, right? Like, sure, you can apply, but like, I've never known anyone who would, like he's saying, I would never leave the community. Why would you want to, right? Like the community is so ordered. All the choices are so good. Like they try to keep us happy. Like, why would you ever really want to leave the community? Even spouses that you meet, like all of that stuff is so clearly planned, so meticulous that they do whatever they can to make sure that people aren't upset with the decision that the committee makes, which is interesting. And so that's chapter 6. We get into chapter 7. Let me pause right here. Let's take a quick little pause, and I'm going to see about chapter 7. Okay, we're going to go back to our chill spot for a second. I'm going to go look at I think I have my other Giver book with me just so I can look through chapter 7 just to see how long it is. And maybe we'll do it real quick because chapter 7 is where everything does start to kick off. So we've learned the world in these first 6 chapters. We've learned about the ceremonies. We've learned about the rules that are involved and the choices that are made for people and how children are given out and all this kind of stuff. So chapter 7 is where Jonas finally gets to his ceremony of 12 and finally gets his assignment and figures out what it's going to be. So let me go just see how long it is and see where it ends, because I feel like it would be a good place to stop the first section, but I just want to make sure. So give me a second real quick. Let me play some music for you while I'm waiting. And I will be right back with my Giver book. Okay, so the sad truth is that I couldn't find my Giver book. But I couldn't find my Giver book, unfortunately. So I'm just gonna click through here real quick. I think this is not a long chapter. And I feel like maybe this one would be a more fun one to end off on because it has a little bit more of a cliffhanger. So yeah, so that means that I'm gonna need to change the title and the thumbnail. Awesome. So let's go ahead and let me do that real quick. I'm gonna change the title. We're gonna go to chapter 7. We're gonna go to chapter 7. We're gonna do it. And I have to add this on. And that just means we've got less chapters to read. We might make this, I think this could be a 3-stream book. If we go up to chapter 7. Oh man, I'm also gonna need to change my thumbnail. Sit here and wait while I do that, please. Chapter 7. Download. I know this is really weird for me to be doing this. We're sitting here waiting. Why not? Why not, right? Go through? Okay. Let's edit this again. Change. There we go. Perfect. All right. Close that up. All right, great. All right, just because Macho Man suggested it, he's absolutely right. This is a much better place to end. Is chapter 7. So let's get into finishing up with chapter 7 instead of chapter 6. Plus we got a little bit of extra time, so why not, right? Okay, back into the world of the book, the library. We're gonna finish up with chapter 7 today. All right, chapter 7. Now Jonas's group had taken a new place in the auditorium, trading with the new 11 so that they sat in the very front immediately before the stage. They were arranged by their original numbers, the numbers they had been given at birth. The numbers were rarely used after the naming, but each new child knew his number, of course. Sometimes parents used them in irritation at child's misbehavior, indicating mischief unworthy of a name. Jonas always chuckled when he heard a parent exasperated call sharply to a whining toddler, "That's enough, 23." Jonas was 19. He had been the 19th new child born this year. It had meant that at his naming, he had been already standing and bright-eyed, soon to walk and talk. It had given him a slight advantage the first year or two, a little more maturity than the many of his groupmates who had been born in the later months of that year. But it evened out, as it always did, by 3. After 3, the children progressed at much the same level, though by their first number, one could always tell who was a few months older than the others in the group. Technically, Jonas's full number was 1119, since there were other 19s, of course, in each age group. And today, now that the new 11s had been advanced this morning, there were 2 1119s. At the midday break, he had exchanged smiles with the new one, a shy female named Harriet. But the duplication was only for these few hours. Very soon, he would not be an 11, but a 12. An age would no longer matter. He would be an adult, like his parents, though a new one and untrained still. Asher was 4 and sat now in the row ahead of Jonas. He would receive his assignment 4th. Fiona, 18, was on his left. On the other side sat 20, a male named Pierre, whom Jonas didn't like very much. Pierre was very serious, not much fun, a worrier and a tattletale too. "Have you checked the rules, Jonas?" Pierre was always whispering solemnly. "I'm not sure that's within the rules." Usually, it was some foolish thing that no one cared about, opening his tunic if it was a day with a breeze, taking a brief try on a friend's bicycle just to experience the different feel of it. The initial speech at the ceremony of 12. Sorry, I'm just going to highlight this real quick. The initial speech at the ceremony of 12 was made by the chief elder, the leader of the community, who was elected every 10 years. The speech was much the same each year. Recollection of the time of childhood and the period of preparation, the coming responsibilities of adult life, the profound importance of assignment, the seriousness of training to come. Then the chief elder moved again in her speech. "This is the time," she began, looking directly at them, "when we acknowledge differences. You 11s have spent all your years till now learning to fit in, to standardize your behavior, to curb any impulse that might set you apart from the group. But today, we honor your differences. They have determined your futures." She began to describe this year's group and its variety of personalities. Though she singled no one out by name, she mentioned that there was one who had singular skills at caretaking, another who loved new children, one with unusual scientific aptitude, and a fourth for whom physical labor was an obvious pleasure. Jonas shifted in his seat, trying to recognize each reference as one of his groupmates. The caretaking skills were no doubt those of Fiona on his left. He remembered noticing the tenderness with which she had bathed the old. Probably the one with the scientific aptitude was Benjamin, the male who had devised new important equipment for the rehabilitation center. He heard nothing that he recognized as himself, Jonas. Finally, the chief elder paid tribute to the hard work of her committee, which had performed the observation so meticulously all year. The committee of elders stood and was acknowledged by the applause. Jonas noticed Asher yawn slightly, covering his mouth politely with his hand. Then at last the chief elder called number 1 to the stage, and the assignment began. Each announcement was lengthy, accompanied by a speech directed at the new 12. Jonas tried to pay attention as one, smiling happily, received her assignment as fish hatchery attendant, along with the words of praise for her childhood spent doing many volunteer hours there, and her obvious interest in the important process of providing nourishment for the community. Number 1, her name was Madeline, returned finally amidst the applause to her seat wearing the new badge that designated her fish hatchery attendant. Jonas was certainly glad that fish hatchery attendant is an important piece of information we're going to come back to. Jonas was certainly glad that assignment was taken. He wouldn't have wanted it, but he gave Madeline a smile of congratulation. When a female named Inger, received her assignment as birth mother, Jonas remembered that his mother had called it a job without honor. But he thought that the committee had chosen well. Inger was a nice girl, though somewhat lazy, and her body was strong. She would enjoy the 3 years of being pampered that would follow before her training. She would give birth easily and well. The task of laborer would follow, would use her strength, keep her healthy, and impose self-discipline. Inger was smiling when she resumed her seat. Birth mother was an important job, if lacking in prestige. Jonas noticed that Asher looked nervous. He kept turning his head and glancing back at Jonas until the group leader had given him a silent chastisement, a motion to sit still and face forward. 3. Isaac was given an assignment of instructor of 6s, which obviously pleased him and was well deserved. Now there were 3 assignments gone, none of them ones that Jonas would have liked. Not that he could have been a birth mother anyway, he realized with amusement. He tried to sort through the list in his mind, the possible assignments that remained. There were so many he gave it up, and anyway, now it was Asher's turn. He paid strict attention as his friend went to the stage and stood self-consciously beside the elder. All of us in the community know and enjoy Asher, the chief elder began. Asher grinned and scratched one leg with the other foot. The audience chuckled softly. When the committee began to consider Asher's assignment, she went on, there were some possibilities that were immediately discarded. Some that would clearly not have been right for Asher. For example, she said, smiling, we did not consider for an instant designating Asher as instructor of threes. The audience howled with laughter. Asher laughed too, looking sheepish but pleased at the special attention. The instructors of threes were in charge of the acquisition of correct language. In fact, Chief Elder continued, chuckling a little to herself, we even gave a little thought to some retroactive chastisement for the one who had been Asher's instructor of threes so long ago. At the meeting where Asher was discussed, we retold many of the stories that we all remembered from his days of language acquisition. Especially, she said, chuckling, the difference between snack and smack. Remember, Asher? Asher nodded ruefully, and the audience laughed aloud. Jonas did too. He remembered, though, that he had only been a 3 at the time himself. This punishment used for small children was a regulated system of smacks with a discipline wand. A thin, flexible weapon. A thin, flexible weapon that stung painfully when it wielded. The child care specialists were trained very carefully in the discipline methods. A quick smack across the hands for a bit of minor misbehavior. 3 sharper smacks on the bare legs for a second offense. Poor Asher, who always talked too fast and mixed up words. I'm getting a little scared myself, even as a toddler. As a 3, eager for his juice and crackers at snack time, he one day said smack instead of snack as he stood waiting in line for the morning treat. Jonas remembered it clearly. He could still see little Asher wiggling with impatience in the line. He remembered the cheerful voice call out, I want my smack. The other 3s, including Jonas, had laughed nervously. Snack, they corrected. You mean snack, Asher. But this mistake had been made, and precision of language was one of the most important tasks of small children. Asher had asked for a smack. The discipline wand in the hand of the child care worker whistled as it came down across Asher's hands. Asher whimpered, cringed, and corrected himself instantly. Snack, he whispered. But the next morning he had done it again, and again the following week. He couldn't seem to stop, though for each lapse, the discipline wand came again, escalating to a series of painful lashes. That left marks on Asher's legs. Eventually, for a period of time, Asher stopped talking altogether when he was a 3. This is really bad. I mean, I remember reading this back and I remember this now, but like this kind of like punishment for 3-year-olds is very severe, right? They're literally using corporal punishment for not saying the right thing, like not having the right words to say. Obviously, it's really important to use our words specifically, but like messing up snack and smack is not something that's someone should be like completely like really hurt for, you know? But that is a common practice in the community where they hit children for mistakenly doing something wrong, right? And for Asher, it didn't seem to work the first time, right? He keeps messing up his words. He keeps using the wrong word. And so he's getting a smack every time. And then it eventually leads to him not talking altogether. That's really significant. Like, that's the kind of thing I would be really uncomfortable in this community. That just seems really wrong and harmful. You know, obviously Asher is fine as like the kid he is now, but it's still very, uncomfortable, weird to think about, hard to think about anyway. Later on in the book, I think they talk more specifically about being, precise with your language and stuff like that. For certain reasons, right? Like there's like a certain reason why you want to be specific with your precise with your language, but mixing up snack and smack seems like an awfully little mistake to make, to have to like punish a kid by hitting them physically, you know? So anyway, for a while, the chief elder said, relating the story, we had a silent Asher, but he learned. She turned to him with a smile. When he began to talk again, it was with greater precision, and now his lapses are very few. His corrections and apologies are very prompt, and his good humor is unfailing. The audience murmured in agreement. Asher's cheerful disposition was well known throughout the community. Asher, she lifted her voice to make the official announcement. We have given you the assignment of Assistant Director of Recreation. She clipped on his new badge as he stood beside her, beaming. Then he turned and left the stage as the audience cheered. When he had taken his seat again, the chief elder looked down at him and said the words that she had said now 4 times and would say to each new 12. Somehow she gave it special meaning for each of them. Asher, she said, thank you for your childhood. The assignments continued, and Jonas watched and listened, relieved but now by the wonderful assignment his best friend had been given. But he was more and more apprehensive as his own approached. Now the new 12s in the row ahead had all received their badges. They were fingering them as they sat, and Jonas knew that each one was thinking about the training that lay ahead. For some, one studious male had been selected as doctor, a female as engineer, and another for law and justice. It would be years of hard work and study. Others, like laborers and birth mothers, would have much shorter training period. 18, Fiona, on his left, was called. Jonas knew she must be nervous, but Fiona was a calm female. She had been sitting quietly, serenely through the ceremony. Even the applause, though enthusiastic, seemed serene when Fiona was given the important assignment of caretaker of the old. It was perfect for such a sensitive, gentle girl, and her smile was satisfied and pleased when she took her seat beside him again. Jonas prepared himself to walk up on the stage when the applause ended, and the chief elder picked up the next folder and looked down to the group to call forward the next new 12. He was calm now that his turn had come. He took a deep breath and smoothed his hair with his hand. 20, he heard her voice say clearly. Pierre. She skipped me, Jonas thought, stunned. Had he heard wrong? No. There was a sudden hush in the crowd, and he knew that the entire community realized that the chief elder had moved from 18 to 20, leaving a gap. On his right, Pierre, with a startled look, rose from his seat and moved to the stage. A mistake. She made a mistake, but Jonas knew, even as he had the thought, that she hadn't. The chief elder made no mistakes, not at the ceremony of 12. He felt dizzy and couldn't focus his attention. He didn't hear what assignment Pierre received and was only dimly aware of the applause as the boy returned, wearing his new badge. Then, 21, 22. The numbers continued in order. Jonas sat dazed as they moved into the 30s and then the 40s, nearing the end. Each time, at each announcement, his heart jumped for a moment, and he thought wild thoughts. Perhaps now she would call his name. Could he have forgotten his own number? No, he had always been 19. He was sitting in the seat marked 19. But she had skipped him. He saw the others in his group glance at him, embarrassed, and then avert their eyes quickly. He saw a worried look on the face of his new group leader. He hunched his shoulders and tried to make himself smaller in his seat. He wanted to whisper, to fade away, not to exist. He didn't dare turn and find his parents in the crowd. He couldn't bear to see their faces darkened with shame. Jonas bowed his head and searched through his mind. What had he done wrong? And that's where we're going to stop for today. Okay. Just before we get into stopping, I will finish up this chapter. So the ceremony of 12 is like so big and special. It's probably why it takes so long. The whole afternoon is because they like call each individual kid up and give them like a little speech about them and then give them their assignment, which is cute. And like very special because it's obviously this big transition from childhood to adulthood. They even say to the children as they're giving their assignments, thank you for your childhood, as, you know, to like mark this is the end, right? You're now moving on to being adult, to going into the adult world. And, Jonas is watching like and contemplating as all of these people are getting their assignments. He's knowing that these people are, the students are thinking, or the kids are thinking, they're going to have to go into training periods. Depending on the job that they get is going to create a longer training period and a shorter training period for others. And that's interesting. It's important to note, right, that it's now going to be very different for each of them as they all go on their different paths. And of course, Fiona gets caretaker of the old, which fits her well. And it's now his turn and he's so excited. And then she doesn't call his number. She calls the next number and then keeps going, and the next number and the next number. And he's like, I didn't get called. And he's like wondering, why didn't I get called? What's going on? Why? Hello? Like, and he's now thinking it's something that he's done wrong. Like he's messed up. Like this is it, right? His name didn't get called. He's not going to get an assignment. He's going to be like that one kid who had to get an extra time to get their volunteer hours or something. But of course it's not that. It's not the volunteer hours because he's done all his volunteer hours. Like he was fully aware that he's done his volunteer hours. So he's like trying to figure out like, what did I do to not get an assignment? So yeah, right? Like now we're here at the ceremony 12 and all this waiting and hoping for that Jonas has been having since we started the book just gets totally popped just like that. Just bubble burst instantly. So that is where we're going to stop for today. I hope you enjoyed the first 7 chapters of The Giver by Lois Lowry. It's an amazing book, and I'm so excited to finish it up with you guys when we do get to chapters 8 through 12. I probably will go, let's see, if we did 7 chapters today, maybe we'll go to chapter 14 tomorrow or next time. I'm not going to say tomorrow. It's going to be next week sometime when we get to chapter 8 through 14. So I hope you enjoyed these few chapters. We're really looking excited to see what happens with Jonas and, what assignment he gets, if he gets an assignment at all. He's clearly special, right? He's already got some special abilities, so maybe that has something to do with it. He's got very special eyes, but of course, no one in the community talks about the differences except on this day. So this is where they're really going to emphasize some of the differences that Jonas has based on his interactions and the differences that he has between his peers. So he's even more separated from his peers now that he's been called out, or not even called out, like specifically skipped in the ceremony. Everybody's noticing it. All of the other kids in his group are noticing it. All the other people in the community are noticing it. So this is a pretty big deal. So we're going to see what happens with Jonas, the chosen one. Okay, thank you so much for watching. And I will play you out with some more beautiful, more fun music. Thank you again for watching. This has been chapters 1 through 7 of The Giver. Have a fabulous evening. Have a fabulous afternoon. And I will see you in class. Bye.